Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. It was the kind of night that clung to your skin, the air thick, motionless, and sour with the scent of rot. Rain had threatened all day but never fell, leaving the world sticky and breathless. On the edge of Hollow's Reach, tucked behind a wall of dead trees and thorn-choked vines, stood the house. No address, no mailbox, no road leading to it. It wasn't on any map, and yet everyone in town knew it was there. They didn't speak of it. Not out of superstition or fear of sounding crazy, but because something deeper told them not to. Like an instinct buried in the marrow, like a silent command etched in blood across the soul. Marla Jennings never believed in that sort of thing. At 32, she was skeptical by default. A trait earned the hard way through abandonment, betrayal, and a long series of bad choices dressed up as good ones. She had returned to Hollow's Reach for the first time in nearly 2 decades, summoned by a letter that should never have existed. Marla, he's not dead. The house won't let him go. You have to come now. E. There was no return address. The envelope was yellowed with time. The ink bled slightly, as if it had been written in a rush or by something that didn't quite understand how to write like a person anymore. But it was the name at the bottom, just the single letter E, that had shaken her. Eric, her brother, dead for 19 years, drowned in a quarry, his body never found. But he was dead. She had seen him fall, heard the splash, felt the silence after, a silence that stretched too long. That night had carved a pit in her that nothing ever filled again. The nightmares never stopped. Sometimes, in dreams, he spoke to her through bubbles rising in the black water. Sometimes he screamed, and sometimes he whispered. Yet here was this letter. She had driven 12 hours straight, no stops, no questions. When she finally turned off the last paved road and into the dirt trails of Hollow's Reach, the sky had already begun to darken. But now, with the engine of her rental car ticking in the heat and the trees standing still as corpses, she could see the house through the thicket. It wasn't abandoned, though it should have been. The paint hadn't chipped. The windows were intact. A light flickered somewhere deep inside, like a candle behind a sheet of skin. But the strangest part was the way it felt. Like the house wasn't waiting for her. It was watching. She should have turned back. Every fiber of her body screamed it. But people like Marla didn't run. They endured. That's what life had taught her, to endure. So she grabbed the envelope from the passenger seat, stuffed it into her coat pocket, and stepped through the brambles toward the porch. The path hadn't been cleared in years, but something had recently pushed through. Twigs snapped underfoot in deliberate rhythm, like someone had walked it minutes before. The front door was cracked open slightly, and behind it, darkness that didn't seem to end. She hesitated on the porch. A wind moved through the trees behind her, whispering her name, not like a voice but more like a memory, something old and unfinished. She pushed the door open. It didn't creak. It didn't resist. It welcomed her. Inside was colder than expected. Not a natural cold, but a dead cold, like the air had been stolen from the walls. Dust hung frozen mid-air, and everything looked untouched. The couch, the fireplace, the portrait of a family on the mantel. A family that wasn't hers, looked frozen in time. But there was something wrong with the angles. The walls leaned ever so slightly inward, as if the house was inhaling. The hallway twisted just a bit too far left. The stairwell seemed to slope down when it clearly rose. It wasn't immediately noticeable, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Like the whole place was off, she called out, "Eric." Her voice fell flat, swallowed whole. No echo, no reply. Just that flickering light deeper inside. She moved through the living room, each step softer than it should have been. The carpet didn't crunch beneath her feet. It gave. like walking across a thick layer of moss. The walls had pictures. Not hers. Not anyone she recognized. Children with mouths too wide, eyes too bright. In one, a woman smiled but had no teeth. In another, a man stood with his arms around a family, though his face had been blurred out, not by age or damage, but deliberately. Marla turned away from them, heading toward the light. The kitchen was empty, but the stove was warm. A kettle sat atop it, whistling softly, though no steam rose. It wasn't boiling. It was breathing. And then came the sound. Drip. She turned. Drip, not from the sink, not from the kettle, from the ceiling. She looked up. A wet, dark spot had formed in the corner of the room, directly above her, and, from it, something dripped. Not water, not blood. Something thicker, something almost alive. It hissed when it touched the tile. She stepped back, heart racing. And then, a knock. She jumped. The sound came from upstairs. 3 slow knocks. She didn't want to go. Every part of her begged to leave. But something pulled her forward. Not a feeling, not a memory, but a command. She climbed the stairs, each creak sounding like a scream. The knocking had stopped. Now, only silence. But not the normal kind. A stuffed silence, as if something big waited on the other side, holding its breath. The upstairs hallway was lined with doors. 4 of them, all shut, all identical. Then, the letter in her pocket grew warm. She pulled it out. The ink had shifted. The words now read Room 3. Don't speak. She stared in disbelief, then looked up. The 3rd door from the left was slightly ajar. She approached slowly. Inside, the room was dark, too dark. She reached for her phone to use its flashlight, but the screen was cracked. Split straight down the middle, like it had been struck. She didn't remember dropping it. With a trembling hand, she pushed the door open wider. The room was small. A bed, a dresser, a mirror, and on the bed him. Eric. He looked the same as he did 19 years ago. Not a day older, shirtless, shivering, eyes open but staring through the ceiling. His mouth moved, forming silent words. Marla's heart thudded so hard she nearly doubled over. Eric, she whispered. His head snapped toward her, too fast, eyes wide, unblinking. She slapped a hand over her mouth. The letter had said not to speak. He sat up slowly, mouth working silently like he was screaming inside, but couldn't make a sound. His eyes were full of terror, fixed on the mirror behind her. Marla turned. The mirror didn't reflect the room. It reflected something else. A forest at night, trees bending in impossible ways, shadows without sources, and in the center of the reflection, a door. It stood alone, in the middle of the woods, covered in runes that bled like open wounds. And it was opening. Something slithered out. Something wet. Something wrong. She looked back at Eric. He was pointing at his throat, then the mirror, then back to her, begging. But she didn't understand, until the whisper came again, right behind her. You shouldn't have come back. She turned. No one there. But the door, in the mirror, was now open, fully. And something stepped through, and not in the mirror, into the room, and the room went black. She screamed. Only no sound came out. And then she remembered the day Eric drowned. She hadn't tried to save him. She had watched, frozen. And now something else had remembered too. Because the house didn't forget, and the house was hungry. Marla woke gasping, air rushing into her lungs like it had been stolen in her sleep. She sat up, sweat cold on her skin, heart thudding loud and wild in her chest. Her eyes darted around, trying to place herself, but the room was different. Smaller, windowless. The bed she lay on wasn't the same as before. No mirror, no dresser. Just 4 walls, close and smooth, covered in faded wallpaper that pulsed gently like something breathing just beneath the surface. She scrambled off the bed. Her boots made no sound against the floor. There were no visible doors, no seams in the walls, not even corners. Everything curved inward, like she was trapped inside a hollowed out lung. She turned around in circles, disoriented, until a soft creaking sound came from behind her. She spun to see the wallpaper on one of the walls slowly peeling back, curling outward like the edge of a wound. A thin, pale hand reached through the tear, not grabbing, just touching the air. Then a face followed. It was a man, or it had once been. His features were stretched, skin thin and waxy, like it had been pulled too tight over a skull not built for a human face. One eye sagged slightly lower than the other. His mouth was stitched shut with what looked like fishing line, but he smiled through the pain. Marla couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her mind screamed for her to turn, to run, to fight. Anything, but her body betrayed her. The man tilted his head as if curious, then raised a trembling finger to his lips. Shah! He began to pull himself through the wall. Every motion was a wrongness. His shoulders didn't bend where they should. His spine curved in jagged, unnatural angles. As he fully emerged, she saw that his feet were bare, swollen, and left no prints on the floor. He wore a hospital gown, one stained brown near the hem. A patient's tag clung to his wrist, water, damaged, and unreadable. The moment his entire body passed through, the tear in the wall sealed itself shut, wallpaper fusing again with a slick, wet sound. He moved closer to her, and only then did Marla find her voice. "What are you?" she rasped, though her throat felt raw, like she'd been screaming in her sleep for hours. The man stopped. His stitched lips twitched. He lifted his arm slowly and pointed not at himself, but at her. Then to the ceiling, then to the bed, and then he turned. He walked toward the far wall. As he did, the wallpaper curled open for him again, just enough to let his body through. When he disappeared, the seam vanished like nothing had ever broken the surface. Marla stood there, trembling. The silence returned, but not the same kind. This one had a weight to it. A threat. Something was listening now, watching more closely, like her awakening had changed the rules. She moved to the wall where the man had left. She pressed her hands against it. Nothing happened. But then she felt it. Faint vibrations. A heartbeat. Not hers. The room had a heartbeat. Suddenly, a voice, low and muffled, echoed from inside the wall like it was trapped in insulation. "You left him." The words wrapped around her, came from every direction and nowhere at once. "You let him drown." She stumbled back, heart slamming into her ribs. No, I tried. I couldn't reach him, You didn't try." Then laughter. Quiet, hoarse, like sandpaper dragged across teeth. And then, silence again. Marla backed into the center of the room. She needed to find a way out. This wasn't a dream. The pain in her limbs was too sharp, the air too real, the guilt pressing into her bones too familiar. She reached into her pocket. The envelope was gone. So was her phone. Even her watch had stopped, hands frozen at 3:14. The room shifted suddenly. Just a subtle lurch, like something vast and mechanical had turned beneath the floorboards. The walls pulsed again. And then a door appeared. It didn't slide open or grow into view. It was just there, where nothing had been before. Plain, wooden, no handle. But something about it felt wrong. Like it didn't lead to another room. Like it led somewhere far worse. She hesitated. But what other choice was there? Marla approached it slowly, placing her palm against the surface. It was ice-cold and throbbed faintly, as though something on the other side was pushing back against her touch. The door began to open, not outward but inward, swinging slowly into darkness. She stepped through. At first, there was nothing. A black so total it devoured everything, even the sound of her breath. Then the air shifted. The scent hit her. Wet leaves, iron, mildew. And beneath it all, the cloying stench of something decaying slowly over years. Light flickered ahead. She moved toward it, her footsteps now loud again. Crunching across leaves and something soft that broke underfoot, she emerged into a forest. But not the one from outside the house. This one was warped. The trees bent inward in twisted arches, their bark pulsing with a sickly red glow. No stars above. Just a black sky that moved like water, thick and slow. And the forest was dead quiet. No birds, no wind, no rustling. But something was near. Ahead, a figure stood beneath a crooked tree. Eric, still 12 years old, still in the clothes he wore the day he died. He looked at her, face pale, eyes wide with a sadness that hurt to see. His mouth moved again, silently, but this time she understood. "Help me." She ran to him, reached for him, but her hands passed through air. He was a shadow, an echo. Then she heard it again, the whisper of leaves, though no wind blew. A second figure stepped into view behind him. It was the man from the wall. Only now his face wasn't stitched shut. It hung open, mouth yawning far too wide, skin splitting along the cheeks like paper torn from the inside. And he spoke. But the voice didn't match. It was her mother's. "You left him." The man stepped forward, towering behind Eric. One hand rose, fingers blackened and cracked, and gently touched the boy's shoulder. Eric didn't react. Marla screamed, lunged forward, but the forest twisted, trees reshaping themselves around her, blocking her path, forcing her back, and the man-thing smiled again. "Now you stay." The world shook. The sky rippled. Then everything snapped to black. She was back in the room. Same bed. Same curved walls. No door this time. No sign the forest had ever existed. But on the bed beside her now sat an old, leather-bound journal. It hadn't been there before. On the cover, carved in deep, raw scratches, "The Raulas of The Hausa," and below it, in smaller letters that pulsed slightly with each heartbeat of the room, one, "Don't speak his name." 2, "Never trust the mirrors." 3, "If the walls open, follow, but not too far." 4, "If you hear the weeping man, do not look." 5, "At 3:14, the house remembers." There were many more, pages and pages of them, and scribbled along the margin of one, faint, nearly faded away, was a final warning: don't try to leave. The house won't let go unless it has something else to keep. Marla closed the book, her hands shaking, and from deep in the walls something scratched. Marla didn't sleep, not because she didn't want to, but because the house wouldn't let her. Every time she closed her eyes, it started again. The whispers, the scratching, the shifting weight in the walls. They didn't come in waves. They came all at once, like everything inside the house was pressing against her mind at once, testing her. The book, the rules of the house, still lay in her lap, pages now heavier, almost wet to the touch. She hadn't dared flip past Rule 30. The last one she read warned her about the third knock. It said nothing about what happened if you answered it. But then came the sound. Not a knock, a groan. Low, drawn out, wood grinding against wood. The kind of sound a tree might make when it's dying. It vibrated through the floor and up her spine, settling deep behind her eyes. She stood slowly, clutching the journal to her chest. The room had changed again. Not much, but enough to notice. The wallpaper had started to peel from the top, revealing dark, breathing patches of rotted wood. The bed was gone, replaced by something that looked like it was built from bone and rusted nails. A thick rope hung from the ceiling above it, swinging gently, though the air was still. She turned in a slow circle. No door, no seam, just wall. Until the floor beneath her foot suddenly gave. She stumbled, falling forward, and the wall across from her split. Not opened. Split. A jagged crack ran from floor to ceiling, bleeding a slow, black ooze that smelled like sulfur and meat left in the sun. From it came light. Not white, but sickly yellow, like a broken candle sputtering in the dark. She crawled toward it. The crack widened as she neared, stretching like the mouth of something that had just noticed it was hungry. Then it opened fully, and beyond it, a hallway. She didn't remember there being a hallway before, but there it was. Long, narrow, lined with dozens of doors, each one different. One was made entirely of glass. Another looked like it was ripped from a church confessional. One door seemed to be covered in stretched leather, stitched together with human hair. She didn't want to imagine what lay behind any of them. At the far end, a faint light pulsed, and with it came the sound of music. A child's music box, slowly winding down. The air shifted again. The book in her hands grew warm. She opened it without meaning to. A new rule had written itself across a once blank page. Rule 30. 1. If you hear the carousel, do not follow the music. It is not for you. Marla slammed the book shut. She took one step into the hallway, and the door behind her vanished. She turned in time to see the wall reseal itself, smooth as skin. The house had made its decision. She was going forward. She moved cautiously, every step echoing far too loud. The doors seemed to shiver as she passed them, some breathing against their hinges, others whispering softly in voices just low enough not to understand. One door rattled violently as she neared it, shaking in its frame like something behind it was dying to get out. She kept her eyes forward. The music grew louder, but she didn't follow it. She took a left at the corner, and that's when she saw it. A room that hadn't been there seconds before. The door was half open, light spilling out into the hallway. Normal light, warm, golden, the kind that smelled like old coffee and morning dust. Inside was a living room, ordinary, familiar, and on the couch her father, dead 10 years, drunk, shirt half buttoned, face slumped forward in the same way she remembered finding him that last night before foster care took her away. She froze in the doorway. He lifted his head. Marla, he said, voice hoarse. Come here, baby girl. Let me look at you. She stepped back. No, she said quietly. I just want to talk, he whispered. It's been so long. She felt the book shift again in her arms. A new line scratched itself into the margin. He is not your father. The figure on the couch stood, taller than she remembered, limbs too long, skin sagging in places it shouldn't. His eyes wept black tears. You left me, too, he said. Everyone leaves. But not here. Not anymore. He lunged. Marla slammed the door before he reached her, heart pounding. The knob writhed under her palm like it was alive, so she let go, stumbling backward down the hall. Then came the whisper again, this time from directly behind her. Room 9, go, now. She turned. No one was there, but door number 9, solid oak painted blue, stood open. She ran. Inside was darkness at first, then the faint glow of candlelight. The room was circular, the walls lined with mirrors. All identical, all facing inward. And in every reflection, she saw herself, only not as she was now. Each mirror showed a different version of her. One with a mouth stitched shut, one with hollow eyes and a soaked nightgown, one that bled from the ears, screaming silently, another wearing her childhood clothes, holding a bloody rock. She spun around, backing toward the center, and then saw it. One mirror was empty, no reflection, just darkness, and slowly, something stepped into it, not from behind, from inside. It wore her face, but wrong, skin too pale, eyes sunken, hair slicked with blood, and as it emerged fully, it smiled. She tried to run, but the mirrors closed in. The room shrank. The reflections pounded on the glass, their screams muted, frantic. The doppelganger reached for her. Then the room shattered. Glass exploded outward, flinging her into the hallway. When she woke, the door to room 9 had sealed. The hallway was shorter now, tighter, doors gone, light dim, and something was crawling on the ceiling. She didn't look up. She remembered the rule. Instead, she ran. She ran until the hallway twisted itself into stairs. Downward, always downward. And as she descended, something began whispering numbers in her ear. Room numbers, a countdown. 8, 7, 6. She knew when it reached 0, something would happen, something final. But there was nowhere else to go. So she ran deeper, into the dark, and the house followed. The stairwell was endless. Or maybe it just wanted to feel that way. Each step Marla took echoed like she was walking on bones. Soft, hollow, brittle bones that cracked without breaking. The walls pulsed faintly with a dull, fleshy warmth, and the air grew thicker, each breath like trying to swallow soup full of hair and dust. There were no lights, just that low, sick glow that seemed to ooze from the stairs themselves, casting shadows that didn't quite match her movement. The countdown in her ear hadn't stopped. 5, 4, not a whisper anymore, not even inside her head. The house was saying it now. not in a voice she could recognize, but 1,000 broken ones, layered over each other, glitching in and out of pitch like a throat learning to speak again. 3. She turned a corner and the stairs dropped suddenly. No warning, just a plunge. Her foot found nothing but air, and she tumbled, screaming, arms flailing, her journal ripped from her grip as she collided with the floor. She felt her ribs take the worst of it, dull ache already blooming into sharp pain. But there was no blood. The house wouldn't let her bleed. Not yet. She pushed herself up, groaning. She was in a room, large, empty. A single hanging bulb swayed above her, unlit. Something wet dripped from it, but she didn't look up. She remembered the rule. Don't look at the ceiling. Her journal lay nearby, face down, and she crawled toward it. The moment her fingers touched the cover, the bulb above her sparked. Once, twice, then clicked on. The light was pale, sickly, like a flashlight filtered through wax paper. And around her, the walls were covered in writing. No, scratched into the surface. Hundreds of names, some she recognized, old classmates. Her social worker, her foster mother, even her high school chemistry teacher, and all of them followed by a date. No explanations, no context, just a list. And at the very bottom, one name etched deeper than the rest, so deep it had cut through the wood and into something darker. Eerie Genin NGS Tenardender 100G 2005, the date he died. Marla staggered back, heart thudding. When the floor beneath the names shifted, a narrow line cracked open in the middle, forming a perfect rectangle, like a trapdoor trying to remember how to move. From below, cold air poured up, and with it came singing, a child's voice, soft, off-key. A lullaby Marla hadn't heard since she was a little girl, one her mother used to hum when the power went out during storms. Sleep, sleep, don't look deep, where broken ones crawl and old ones creep. She covered her ears. No, no, no. But it kept going, down where the eyes and the walls don't blink, and the blood in the pipes begins to think. The trapdoor opened fully. A staircase led down. This one wasn't built of wood or stone. It was made of teeth, some cracked, some rotten, some still stained with red. The walls around the passage throbbed like gums, and the voice, now clearly Eric's, called again. Marla, come see, come remember. She wanted to run, but there was nowhere left to go. Her hands shook as she stepped onto the first tooth. It groaned beneath her weight. The second step squelched. The third twitched, and then the trapdoor above slammed shut. She was committed. The descent was silent now, save for the slow grinding noise of something big turning far beneath her, like the house was winding a key deep in its belly. She didn't know how long she walked. The air down here didn't carry time. Eventually, the staircase ended. She stood in front of a door. Iron, rusted, bolted shut from the outside, from her side, and on it, smeared in something that reeked of rot and bile, a message do no topn. He remembiars u yeo du dedi. Her fingers hovered near the bolt. She knew. Whatever was behind this door wasn't the house. It wasn't part of the rules. It was the reason for the rules. Still, she unlatched the bolt. The door creaked open, just enough to peek inside. And what she saw broke her. It was Eric, but not the boy she remembered. This thing was a man, grown, gaunt, chained to the wall like an animal, hair long, eyes sunken, nails clawed bloody at the stone beneath him, mouth sewn shut, and yet he was crying. She stepped into the room. The air changed instantly, heavy, full of grief so thick it tasted like metal. Eric looked up, and for a moment, just a second, the sewn lips smiled. Then the chains went taut. His body jerked forward, limbs bending wrong, neck snapping back with a sickening crack. The wall behind him bloomed open like a wound, and from it, something stepped out. Not a creature, not even a shape, just darkness folded into the suggestion of a face. No eyes, no mouth, just movement. It didn't lunge, didn't roar. It simply whispered, "Would you trade your place for his?" Marla froze. The figure tilted its head. "Would you trade your guilt?" The chains uncoiled. Eric stood, limping, broken, but reaching for her. I didn't leave you, she whispered. But even as she said it, she felt the truth curl under her tongue. She had. She ran. And the house remembered. The thing behind Eric moved closer, wrapping around the man's frame like a shadow returning to its body. Choose, it said. Marla looked down at the journal in her hands. Another rule had etched itself in Rule 40. If you reach the pit, do not lie. The house knows. She looked back up. I'm sorry, she said, voice breaking. I let you die. Eric smiled again. Then the shadow screamed, not loud, but real. The walls shook, the light went red, and the floor vanished. She fell, down into something deeper than the house. Past memory, past time, into the part of the house no one was meant to see. There was no sensation of falling, only dropping. A silent, weightless plunge through something colder than space, darker than death, and older than anything she had ever known. Marla didn't scream. The air wouldn't let her. It was too thick, too heavy. It pressed into her lungs like oil. Her mind tried to make sense of what was happening, but all logic collapsed the moment the house unzipped the world and dragged her down. Then, just as suddenly as it began, she stopped. No impact, no sound. She was simply standing again, upright, knees trembling on ground that wasn't solid but didn't give, either. Beneath her feet, the floor looked like concrete at first, but when she stepped, it pulsed, it breathed. Something beneath it moved, slowly, like a sleeper shifting in a dream. The room she stood in wasn't part of any blueprint. It couldn't be. No angles, no symmetry. The walls were curved in ways that tricked the eye, overlapping like folds of wet cloth. Massive columns spiraled upward into shadow, vanishing into a ceiling she could not see. But the smell was familiar now, mildew, rot, old blood, and dust burned into ash. It was the scent of the house's truth. Marla held the journal tightly against her chest, though she wasn't sure why anymore. The rules had stopped updating. The last entry still read Rule 40. If you reach the pit, do not lie. The house knows. No other lines appeared. The silence stretched around her. Then, from the darkness ahead, a soft ticking sound. She turned toward it instinctively. It came from a narrow corridor that appeared as if it had been waiting to be noticed. Hidden until the moment she looked. The ticking grew louder with each step she took, precise and mechanical. And as she followed it, the corridor tightened. The walls moved when she wasn't looking. She could feel them shifting behind her, drawing closer, like lungs exhaling against her back. Eventually, she reached the source of the sound, a room circular like the others but smaller, and in the center, a single object, a grandfather clock. Its face was cracked. The hands turned backward, ticking in reverse, yet never touching any numbers. Around it, the floor was covered in broken glass, shards reflecting versions of herself she didn't recognize. Versions with missing eyes, twisted smiles, broken limbs, one with fire where her face should be. As she stepped forward, the clock stopped ticking. Dead silence. Then the chimes began. Not loud, deliberate. 1, 2, 3. Each chime echoed too long, overlapping with the next. By the sixth chime, the walls began to drip. At first, just beads of dark water. Then thicker, redder. Blood began to leak down in rivulets, following the curves in the wall like veins. By the 10th, the floor trembled. By the 12th, the clock exploded, not violently, but from within. Its face shattered outward like it had been filled with pressure, and from the hole behind the gears, a hand reached out. It wasn't human. Long fingers, too many joints, nails like thorns, wet and trembling like it hadn't been used in years. Then a second hand, then a face, but not Eric. It wore her mother's skin. The thing that pulled itself from the clock dragged its body forward, eyes blank, mouth sewn shut with wires. It moved with jerks like a puppet in the hands of a drunk. Marla stumbled back, breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, but the room had no exit anymore. The door she entered through was gone. The thing stood fully now. Then, slowly, it raised its stitched hands and began to untangle the wires from its mouth, one by one. The tension was unbearable. Finally, it spoke, not with her mother's voice, but with Marla's own. "You have to remember what you did." Marla shook her head. "I remember. I remember the quarry. I remember watching him fall. I remember not jumping in. I was a child. I was scared." The thing smiled. "You chose not to jump." Then came the sound of rushing water. Not around her, inside her ears. She dropped to her knees, clutching her head as the pressure built. Water, cold and thick, filled her nose and throat. Her eyes burned. She couldn't breathe. And through the roar of drowning, she saw it again. The quarry, 19 years ago. Eric falling. Her frozen on the edge. Only this time, it kept going. She didn't turn away like she remembered. She leaned forward. She saw him resurface. Saw him reach. She saw herself step back, not scared. Unwilling. And then, she smiled. It wasn't the face she wore now. It was the younger version. But the smile was unmistakable. She had let him drown. Wanted him to. The memory slammed into her like a punch. The water vanished. Marla collapsed, coughing, retching, crying. I didn't. But the lie was already unraveling. The thing wearing her mother's skin reached forward and gently touched her forehead with one cold, damp finger. The entire room turned inside out. Walls screamed. Mirrors shattered. The ground beneath her tore open like skin split by a blunt blade. And beneath it, something waited. Something alive. A room of flesh and whispering mouths. She fell into it, and it swallowed her whole. She tumbled through wet darkness. Screams bouncing off the inside of a body too big to die. Faces floated past her, familiar and twisted. Her brother, her mother, her father, all screaming without sound. At last, she landed, not on the floor, on a tongue. A massive stone-like tongue. Slick with blood and twitching beneath her weight, she stood barely. In front of her, a pulsing heart, the size of a car, dangled from cords of muscle and vein, suspended in the center of a cavern lit by flickering, unnatural light. And beneath it, writing carved into the tissue of the walls. She stepped closer to read it. Ts duiae hos ria mbrs. And then, slowly, the heart began to open. A slit forming down the middle, wide enough to crawl through, and from inside he's singing. Not Eric this time. A child. One she hadn't met yet. But she knew the voice, because it was hers, younger, humming that same lullaby. Sleep, sleep, don't look deep, the heart throbbed, and whispered. Go deeper. Marla didn't move at first. The heart split open before her like a blooming wound, pulsed with a sick rhythm, wet and steady, like it had been waiting years for someone to step inside. The smell was unbearable now. Not just blood, but something worse. Something like forgotten breath, like teeth left in the dark too long. The singing inside it hadn't stopped, and even though the voice was clearly hers, it wasn't any version she remembered. It was too calm, too slow. Each note lingered, just a bit longer than it should have, like it wanted to be heard by something else listening nearby. The tongue beneath her feet twitched again, and for a brief second, she swore she felt it laugh. She couldn't stay here. Whatever the house was building toward, whatever game it was playing with her mind, it had moved past confusion, past terror. This was something more precise, a punishment. It wasn't just trying to scare her, it wanted her to understand. And worse, it wanted her to agree. She clutched the journal tighter. The pages fluttered on their own, reacting to the proximity of the open heart. No new rule appeared, but on the last written page, the ink had begun to melt. The words twisted into new letters. Inside the wound, the truth walks upright. Don't let it wear your face. A warning, yes, but one with no direction. Marla stepped forward. Each motion through the blood-slick threshold felt like crawling back into something that should never have been exited in the first place. Warmth swallowed her limbs. The walls of the passage pulsed against her shoulders. Inside, it was quiet again, the kind of quiet that made her feel like the only person left alive in the world, until a second voice joined the lullaby. Soft, raspy, a harmony, Eric's. She moved faster. The tunnel widened slowly, not gradually, but in lurches, the way a nightmare changes shape between blinks. After what felt like 1,000 breaths, the heart's passage opened into a new chamber. She stepped into it. At first, she thought she was standing in a void. There were no walls, no floor, just endless gray, swirling mist that tasted like copper and dirt. But as she squinted, shapes began to form, sharp, slow, moving silhouettes. Furniture, lamps, toys, a tricycle missing one wheel, a red balloon hovering just an inch off the ground. She recognized them all, every object, every one from her childhood. This room was her, or at least, what the house thought she was. And in the middle of it all stood a table, atop it a cake, chocolate, melted in places, frosting bleeding down the sides like veins. A candle still lit. One candle. She approached it like it might detonate. Next to the cake lay a photo. She knew it before she picked it up. Her and Eric, the last birthday they had together. He was smiling. She wasn't. She remembered the moment. The picture taken seconds before she pushed the cake into his lap and stormed out because he got the gift she wanted. It wasn't about the toy, though. Not really. It was the way he was loved. Effortlessly. Constantly. She remembered hating that. The memory wrapped itself around her like barbed wire. The floor beneath the table shifted. Not dipped, morphed. It opened downward like a drain pulling light and gravity through itself. And from below, a figure began to rise. She didn't run. Because deep down, she knew it would be her. And it was. Same eyes, same skin, same voice. But this version, it smiled differently, like it knew it was real. And she was the copy. "I've been waiting," it said. "You're late." Marla stared. "What are you?" It tilted its head mockingly. "What you buried. What you cut out of yourself to survive. I'm what's left of you down here." The thing began circling the table, fingers dragging across the icing like it had all the time in the world. "I'm the moment you chose not to scream. The night you locked the door when you heard Dad breaking dishes. The time you lied and told them Eric ran off when you knew where he was. I'm the piece of you that never stopped smiling while he sank." Marla backed away. "No, that's not true. I was a child. I was scared." The doppelganger stopped. "Exactly. You were scared. And I'm the part of you that liked how it felt to have power, even if it meant watching him disappear." The candle on the cake flickered violently. From the mist, mirrors appeared. Dozens of them, a circle forming fast. And in each mirror her, crying, laughing, screaming, smiling. Each one from a different memory. And in every one, behind her stood Eric. Sometimes reaching, sometimes watching, sometimes grinning. The air grew thick. The other Marla stepped closer. "You came here looking for him. But it was never about Eric. It was about you. You want forgiveness without giving up the parts that earn the guilt." The real Marla shook her head, lips trembling. "I want to make it right." "Then take my hand," the other said. A moment passed, and then the walls reappeared, solid now, metal, lined with breathing holes, and behind each hole an eye, watching, waiting, judging. The mirrors cracked, one by one, until only a single reflection remained, the one where Marla stood alone. No brother, no house, no guilt, just her. That was the moment she understood. The house wasn't a place, it was a choice. She looked down at the journal. New ink blood through. Rule 40. One, you cannot escape what you refuse to claim. She closed her eyes and reached for her other self's hand. When their fingers touched, the world exploded in light. Not warmth, not salvation, but clarity, sudden, blinding. The house screamed, not in pain, but in recognition. And then everything went white. No floor, no walls, no sound. Just one final echo, fading slow. "Now you remember." Marla opened her eyes to sunlight. Not the pale, twisted imitation the house sometimes used to trick her, but real light. Warm, golden. It poured through gauzy curtains and bathed everything in a soft glow. The hum of cicadas rose outside. A breeze carried the smell of cut grass, faint gasoline, and the sweetness of honeysuckle. For a moment she lay there frozen, heart rattling against her ribs, waiting for it to change, for the shadows to twist, for the walls to breathe. But nothing moved. Nothing dripped. Nothing whispered. It was her old room, from before Eric drowned, before the foster homes, before the hollow years. The posters on the wall, the scratchy comforter, the dent in the closet door from the time she slammed it during a tantrum. It was all there, untouched. Her throat tightened. Had she dreamt everything? The house. The journal, Eric's voice. Could trauma shape the mind so violently it made you live entire lifetimes in a nightmare stitched from guilt? She sat up. Her hands shook. No blood, no dirt, no ache in her ribs. She was wearing pajamas, familiar ones, blue flannel with little stars on them. And there, on the nightstand, her old digital clock, 9:14 a.m. Marla stood and crossed the room. Outside, the world looked as it always had. The yard, the street, Mrs. Halverson's ugly pink mailbox, still crooked from where the snowplow hit it years ago. She laughed, actually laughed, sharp and awkward, like something cracking open in her chest. Was it over? Was she finally awake? A knock came at the door. She jumped. Her stomach turned, nausea blooming deep and sudden. But the knock was gentle. Marla, a woman's voice. Soft, familiar. "Mom," she whispered. It was her mother. No question. Alive. Whole. She opened the door. And there she stood, leaning slightly, holding a plate with toast and a folded paper napkin, just like she used to. "I made breakfast. You doing okay, sweetheart?" Marla couldn't speak. Her mother stepped in, kissed her forehead. "You looked like you were tossing and turning all night." It was too much. The scent of her shampoo, the creak in her knees, the subtle way her hand trembled when she set the plate down. It was all perfect. Too perfect. And that's when Marla noticed something. The clock, still 9:14. She stared at it, didn't blink, waited. Still 9:14. The room hadn't moved. The sun hadn't shifted. The breeze hadn't touched a single curtain string. "Mom," she said slowly. "Yes, honey. What day is it?" Her mother smiled. "The best one." Marla backed away. The smile stayed on her mother's face a little too long. A little too still. Her eyelids didn't blink. Her breathing didn't change. Then her head tilted. Not a natural tilt, not like confusion, but like a puppet whose strings had been pulled wrong. "You're safe now," the woman said. But it wasn't her mother's voice anymore. It was hers. The other Marla. The one she touched in the heart room. "You said you were ready," it whispered. "So I gave you what you wanted." Marla turned and ran. The door wasn't there. Just wall. The windows, painted on. The floor rippled under her feet like soft muscle. Everything began to peel away. The illusion dissolved like wet paper. The posters bubbled and slid off. The bed turned to ash. Her mother's body jerked and twitched, collapsing into a shape too long, too narrow, with too many bones in the wrong places. And from the ceiling, water began to drip, cold, thick. She screamed, not in fear, but fury. "You said I remembered," she shouted into the dissolving world. "You said I chose!" The house answered with silence. Then, a door appeared, black, tall, with no knob, and carved into its center, freshly bleeding EFUO. She approached it, breathing hard. The moment her palm touched the wood, the walls inhaled, and the door opened inward. The world beyond was a hospital hallway. Cold, fluorescent, lit. The scent of bleach and something sharp filled her nose. She stepped through. The door vanished behind her. To her right, nurses passed by without seeing her. A janitor mopped near an empty vending machine, humming tunelessly. No one noticed her. She wasn't part of this world yet. And then she saw it. Room 214. The name on the chart clipped outside the door, Jennings Eric. She reached for it. Read it. Date of admission October 11, 2005. Current status, persistent vegetative state. Marla's legs gave out. She fell against the wall. All this time, he hadn't drowned. No, he had. But something pulled him back. Not alive, not dead, kept. By the house. By the thing she had built with her guilt. The hospital around her shimmered for a second. flickered like an old film reel losing track. Then it stabilized. This was real. Somewhere in the real world, Eric was still breathing, still locked inside himself. And her nightmare hadn't been a metaphor. It was a doorway, a warning, a choice. She stood again. The hallway dimmed. At the end of it, another door opened by itself. Behind it, a staircase, not descending this time, rising. Above the house, above the memory, above the lie. Marla walked toward it. With each step, her heartbeat synced to the sound of her brother's voice. Faint, but clear. Please, don't leave me again. She gripped the railing and climbed. The staircase went higher than it should have. Too high. The ceiling disappeared after the first turn, swallowed in shadow that wasn't dark but absent, like color and light had been erased instead of dimmed. Each step Marla took creaked like it hadn't been touched in decades, and the air around her changed with every foot of ascent. Cooler at first, then dry, brittle, even brittle, then dust. She kept climbing, even as the pain returned to her legs, even as her lungs tightened. The voice kept her going. Eric's voice, whispering behind the walls of the stairwell, not begging, not screaming, calling. Just her name, again and again, like the chant of someone who still believed she might answer. Then the world changed again. The staircase ended with no landing, no transition, just a sudden opening, like waking mid-sentence in a different dream. Marla stepped into a space that looked like sky, blue above, pale clouds drifting lazily, but the floor beneath her feet was marble, impossibly white and without seam. The horizon bent inward, curving like a snow globe flipped inside out. There was no sun, no wind, just the illusion of peace stretched too thin to hold. And in the center of that impossible sky chamber stood a child. Not Eric, her. 8 years old, barefoot, wearing a yellow dress she remembered hating. Her hair in 2 clumsy braids, eyes wide, vacant, mouth smeared with cake and something darker. The child didn't look up. She sat cross, legged on the marble floor, surrounded by open books. Some from the real world. Her school notebooks, old sketch pads, but others were from the house. Pages stitched together with hair. Leather covers that twitched when touched. One book had no cover at all, just bleeding parchment that curled at the edges as if flinching from her presence. The child version of her was humming again, the same lullaby. Sleep, sleep, don't look deep. Marla approached cautiously. What is this place? The girl didn't answer, just turned a page slowly, delicately. Marla caught glimpses of the text. Drawings of her brother's face. Symbols etched in ink and bone. Some of the pages were blank, but still bleeding. And one held a single sentence, repeated over and over in a child's shaky scrawl. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Marla knelt beside her. You brought me here, she said softly. Didn't you? The girl turned to her, finally, and her eyes were wrong. Not monstrous. Worse, they were empty. Hollow. Like no one had ever lived behind them. You don't get to leave, the child said. Why? Because you never wanted to. I did? No. You wanted to be understood. You wanted someone to hurt for you. And now they do. Marla recoiled, heart pounding. That's not true. I've changed. The child smiled. Her teeth were too small, too even. Dull teeth. That's what they all say. That's why the house grew. The sky above cracked. A thin line running through the blue. And beyond it, black. Real black. The kind that lives beneath oceans and between stars. You fed it, the child said. All those years. Every bad dream. Every angry thought. Every time you told yourself you were the victim. You made this. The books around them began to close, on their own, snapping shut like jaws, and from the crack in the sky, voices began to leak through. Low, rumbling, 1,000 Erics whispering at once. She left me. She watched me drown. She smiled when I sank. Marla covered her ears, screamed. I died in Cano, oh, Akatodo! Silence fell like a guillotine, and the sky split wide. Above them, hanging in the void, was the real house, not the one she'd wandered through. This one was bigger, colder, breathing in steady rhythm with the words crawling up her spine. It was alive, built from the memories she refused to feel, the versions of herself she'd buried. Every brick a moment of cruelty, every window a truth she twisted. The child Marla stood. She was taller now, bleeding from the eyes, smiling wider. "You want to save him?" she asked. "Go ahead." She pointed toward the floating house. "But you don't get to come back." The stairwell behind Marla was gone, replaced by a sheer cliff. No door, no way down, just the house suspended in space and a thin bridge of glass leading to it. Cracks already forming in the first step. The girl faded behind her, repeating one final thing, over and over: "You chose. You choose. You will choose again." Marla stepped onto the glass. It moaned beneath her feet. Below, nothing. No ground. No fall. Just forever. She walked, each step a prayer. At the end of the bridge, the front door waited. Red, breathing, it opened before she touched it. Inside, the house exhaled and welcomed her home. The house closed behind her with a sound like a held breath being clenched instead of released. Not a slam, not a lock, a seal. As if something had just decided, yes, she's finally inside. Marla stood in the entryway, frozen, as the breath she'd been holding slipped from her lips. The air was thicker here than anywhere she'd been before, and it smelled of old wood and salt and something burnt. But it wasn't smoke. It was time, scorched and rewound. The house had changed again. It was no longer trying to pretend. There were no couches, no dusty lamps, no attempt to mimic reality. The walls were jagged, like teeth lining a throat. The floors pulsed faintly beneath her feet, smoother than skin, firmer than muscle. She took a tentative step forward. The hallway blinked. Yes, blinked. Shadows flexing like lids, revealing patches of the house she hadn't seen before. As she walked, the corridor shifted around her. Not like it was confused, but like it was watching her decide where to go. It no longer needed to guide her. It trusted her now. She was one of its own. And that realization cut deeper than anything else had so far. From somewhere deep in the belly of the house, a voice began to speak. It wasn't Eric, it was hers. Not her child self, not the dream girl in the yellow dress, but the exact voice she had. Right now. "I lied," it said. The words slithered across the walls as if tattooed into the wood. "I lied when I said I didn't smile. I lied when I said I forgot. I chose not to save him." Marla stopped walking. Her hands clenched into fists. "I wanted the water to take him. I thought it would make them finally see me." Her voice, her confession, delivered back to her by something she could not control. The walls trembled. Ahead, a staircase formed, descending, sharp-angled, as if cut into bone. Above it, words stitched in pulsing red veins: "Valobu, isththrh. Abovsthelechogin." She didn't move. Not right away. Because she understood now, this wasn't about saving Eric. This wasn't about memory. It was about whether she would stop pretending to be the victim, and whether she would finally step into the part of the story where she had always belonged, the villain. She touched the wall beside her. It was warm, vibrating gently. Beneath the surface, something breathed. Eric's voice came again. But this time, it wasn't scared. It was sharp. "Are you ready to stop running?" She swallowed, nodded, and descended. The staircase was wet beneath her bare feet, slick with something thicker than water. The farther she went, the more it became clear she wasn't going downstairs. She was descending through memories. The walls flickered with images she didn't want to see, snapshots of herself pushing, laughing, hiding, her hand on the fence at the quarry. The way she looked back, just once to see if anyone had noticed before she walked away. Every time she blinked, another piece of herself peeled back. The guilt was no longer a weight, it was a mirror. When the stairs ended, she stood in a round chamber. No ceiling, no floor, just a circle of doors. 12 of them, each identical, simple wood, no handle, no hinges. She stepped toward one. It opened. Inside the hospital room, Eric in his bed, unmoving, machines beeping, A nurse adjusting an IV line with glazed, unseeing eyes. But the window showed something wrong. Nothing. No sky. No light. Just static, as if the room were suspended inside a broken television signal. Marla stepped back. The door closed. She moved to the next. It opened to reveal the quarry, the exact moment he fell. But this time, she could see what she hadn't remembered before. The way her hand twitched just before he slipped, not to reach for him, to pull back. The moment froze. Her eyes met her younger selves across the gulf of time, and the girl smiled. Marla backed away. Another door. This one held a hallway lined with beds, dozens of versions of Eric, some older, some younger, each one with his eyes open but his mouth sewn shut. They watched her silently, and when she tried to move away, the door wouldn't close. She had to turn her back on them. One by one, she opened the remaining doors, each one revealing a truth she had buried, each one a reason the house had let her live while keeping Eric chained in a state worse than death. When she opened the 12th door, there was only herself inside, not a version, not a memory, just her, as she was now, standing in a black space, waiting. The other her turned and spoke. "I kept him here because I wasn't strong enough to carry the guilt alone." Marla nodded. "I'm ready to take it back." The double stepped forward, then into her, not merged, not erased, returned. The walls of the house shivered. From above, the sound of something massive collapsing inward roared through the structure. The house was sinking, not into ground, into her. Because now, she remembered everything, and the house no longer needed to exist. The doors began to crack, one by one. The last thing she heard before the ceiling gave way was Eric's voice, clear and calm. "Come get me, if you still want to try." And then, the floor disappeared. The walls folded, and Marla fell upward. Upward wasn't supposed to feel like drowning, but that's exactly what it was. The fall reversed and twisted, air funneling the wrong way into Marla's lungs, not filling her, but emptying her of something vital. It was as though the house, what was left of it, was peeling her apart from the inside out, unthreading her thoughts, her memories, her identity, and wrapping them around the climb. She wasn't just being pulled back toward Eric, she was being remade for him. And then, silence. No wind, no motion. She was standing again, on solid ground, but nothing around her looked solid. The world was paper thin, layers of translucent film suspended in air, each one flickering like old film strips caught in a looping projector. The floor beneath her feet changed with every blink, once a school hallway, then a cemetery, then a living room she hadn't seen in years. Faces formed in the walls, some she knew, some she had forgotten, and some she had never wanted to see again. Her third foster mother, that kid from her high school who vanished. The officer who'd asked too many questions about Eric's disappearance, and then never came back for the second round. They watched her, not with blame, but with expectation. The space smelled like things buried too long, damp cloth, mildew, old metal. She moved forward, one step, and the world flinched. It folded open like a wound reluctant to show its depth. At the center of the shifting realm stood a hospital bed. Real, grounded, the only thing untouched by the distortion. And in it, Eric. His body looked impossibly still, even as machines hummed faintly beside him. He hadn't aged like the others, not completely. His frame had grown longer, thinner. His arms rested unnaturally straight at his sides, as though molded there. His skin was almost translucent, veins branching like roots. But it was his chest that caught her eye. It was moving, not a rise and fall of breath. It pulsed. Something was beating inside it, something not meant to. Marla approached slowly. Her voice caught in her throat, but she forced it out. "Eric." No response. No flicker of recognition. His eyes remained closed, his mouth slightly open, lips dry, tongue unmoving. The heart monitor beeped. Slow, steady, but not rhythmic, more like it was mimicking a rhythm, pretending to be alive. She reached out, fingers trembling, and touched his hand. It was ice cold, but his lips moved. No sound came out, just the barest twitch, like a whisper caught between breaths. She leaned closer, and then she heard it, not from his mouth, but from inside his chest. A voice, faint, repeating the same word over and over, "Trady, trady, trady." She recoiled. "No, no, I came to bring you back." Again, the voice from within him, "Trady." The world around her darkened. The flickering film layers fell away, curling into ash. And then the room was whole. No distortion, no surrealism, just a hospital room, too bright, too clean, and too quiet. At the far end, a man in a nurse's uniform stood with his back to her. Familiar, too familiar. "Eric?" she asked again. The man turned. It was him. Older. Awake, alive. Eyes filled with a calm that scared her more than anything in the house had. "I'm awake," he said, smiling gently. She staggered. "How?" He took a step closer. "You brought me back." "No." "You're still." "He's still." She turned to look at the bed, but it was empty. No machines. No sheets, no trace he'd ever been there. And when she turned back, he was closer. Wasn't that the point? To wake me up. His voice was smooth. Too smooth. Every syllable perfectly measured. I thought I could fix it," she said. "You can." He reached out. And in that moment, her instincts screamed. Because his hand was wrong. Not deformed. Not monstrous. Just unfamiliar. It was a hand that didn't belong to her brother. It belonged to something else. The voice in his chest whispered again. But now she could hear it clearly. It wasn't asking to trade. It was offering. Take his place. Be the weight. "Let me go. Eric, or what wore him, smiled. You built the house. You fed it. You held me here. The moment you stepped back from the edge and watched the water close. It started. I didn't die, Marla. I just got caught in the place you made for me." Tears spilled down her face. "I didn't mean to. I was scared." "I know," he said, stepping closer still. "But it doesn't change anything." A chair formed beside her. Wooden. Simple. Waiting. "If you sit," he said, "you stay. You carry it. All of it. The weight, the memory, the pain. And I go." She looked at him, into his eyes. And finally, she saw her brother again. For just a flash, the real him. Trapped. Desperate. Worn thin by years of silence. She turned back toward the chair. Its shape pulsed gently, like a heartbeat just under the surface. Her knees buckled. She hovered above the seat, breathing shallow, her soul caught between the need to be forgiven and the hunger to be free. Eric watched. "I'll go," she whispered. "If it means you live, I'll stay." But as she said the words, the room began to change again. Not violently, lovingly, and the voice returned. Not Eric's, not the house's, her own. "You already did." The chair dissolved beneath her. The room shattered like glass struck by silence, and Marla fell once more, this time into a place where no rules were written. Because the next chapter hadn't been decided yet. Marla hit the ground hard, but it didn't feel like ground. It felt like falling into the memory of ground, like her body remembered what landing should feel like, even though the space around her no longer followed the rules of contact or consequence. The world here was dim, not dark. The kind of dim you feel in your bones, like a storm hanging just behind your eyelids. There was no sky, no ceiling, no floor she could identify, just a vast expanse of ash-colored stillness that stretched in all directions, with no beginning and no end. This was not the house. This was beneath the house, the root system, the cellar of the soul. And here, time didn't move forward or back. It just hung, like a heavy curtain that refused to be drawn. She stood slowly. Her body didn't ache the way it should have after everything. In fact, she wasn't even sure this body was the same. Her arms felt lighter, her hands longer. When she reached up to touch her face, it was hers, but thinner, slightly wrong. Her skin buzzed faintly beneath her fingertips, like a machine warming up just under the surface. "Hello," she called out. The sound didn't echo. It looped. Her own voice came back to her, delayed by a breath, saying the exact same words, same tone, only fainter. "Hello." Then a second delay. Then another. and soon her voice was bouncing back at her in layers, whispering hello, hello, hello until it sounded like a crowd mimicking her, mocking her. She took a step forward. The voices fell silent. That's when she saw the first figure, a silhouette at the edge of her vision, just barely formed from the fog of the space. It wasn't walking, it was waiting, a child-sized shape standing perfectly still, back turned to her. Marla approached, heart pounding slow and hard. As she neared, the shape sharpened. A boy, 10, maybe 11, hair soaked, clothes clinging to his limbs, shoulders hunched. "Eric," she said, nearly choking on the word. The figure turned. It was him, but not as she'd remembered. His face was hollow, not in the absence of features, but in expression. Like someone who'd been awake too long. His eyes were bloodshot, the whites replaced by that same dead gray of the world around them. He looked at her, then pointed behind her. Marla turned. Another figure stood there now, an older version of herself, mid-30s, maybe older, hair thinner, posture worse, eyes shattered. This one looked at her with a twisted smile, then began to speak, but not with words, with memories. Marla was suddenly inside them. The fight with her mother the night before Eric drowned, the lie she told to the police officer, the journal she once started and ripped to shreds after only 2 entries because the truth felt too ugly to write down. She was back in all of them, reliving them, and watching herself not flinch, not apologize, just drift further away. Then she was yanked out again, back to the gray space, back to the boy. He was closer now. "You didn't know what I was," he said quietly. Marla's throat tightened. "You were my brother." He shook his head. "I was your shadow." Behind him, more figures appeared. Not ghosts, not hallucinations. Versions of Eric. Dozens. Each one pulled from a different possibility. One older, muscular, successful. One twisted, gaunt, sobbing into his hands. One in a hospital bed, drooling and wide-eyed. One screaming, one smiling, one gone. Marla turned in a slow circle, heart climbing into her throat. "What is this?" she asked. The boy pointed at the ground. It began to change beneath her feet. A circle formed, 12 inches thick, glowing faintly, pulsing like a living heartbeat. Inside it 2 names, Eric Jennings, Marla Jennings. Beneath them a choice. Who deserves to carry it? A tremor moved through the air. Not a sound, not a quake, a pressure. "You made the house," the boy said. "But the house made me." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry." He nodded but didn't smile. "It's not about being sorry." Then came the sound. Not the lullaby this time. A new voice. Older, tired. It was her own, speaking from a place so deep inside herself she barely recognized it. "I don't want to carry this anymore," it said. Marla collapsed to her knees. "I know," she whispered, "but I can't ask him to do it either." The circle beneath her glowed brighter, and the world began to bend. The Eric figures faded one by one, pulled upward like dust caught in wind. Only the child remained, and the circle pulsed again. Marla stood, stepped into the center, and closed her eyes. "I won't leave him," she said. "Not again. But I won't let him carry the weight I gave him, either. I'll take it." Every version, every shadow. The air snapped. A clean, sharp break in the silence. And then she heard it, a real heartbeat, not from the house, from Eric, strong, steady, alive. When she opened her eyes, the child was gone. The gray space cracked like glass. And a voice echoed from somewhere impossibly near. "You're almost home." The world came back in pieces. First, the feeling of a blanket, scratchy, cheap, and hospital, issued. Then the sound of a machine beeping in a careful rhythm. Not the erratic beat of something pretending to live, but the true, measured pulse of a body fighting to stay. Next came the light, pale, clinical, buzzing faintly above her like it could collapse at any second. Marla blinked, once, twice, then sat up. She was in a hospital room, a real one this time, not twisted, not blurred by memory or guilt or whatever living nightmare the house had dragged her through. This one smelled like antiseptic and dry walls and something even worse, hope. For a second, she didn't breathe. She needed confirmation. Her eyes moved, slow and careful, to the bed beside hers. He was Eric, not a boy, not a memory. A man, older, thinner, deeply asleep. Tubes in his arm, machines helping where his body couldn't. But his chest was rising and falling on its own. A nurse moved quietly past the door, glanced in, gave her a nod so casual, so normal, it nearly broke her in half. Eric was alive. She felt it. Not just the machines, not just the monitors, but in the room, the presence of a soul that had finally been unhooked from something larger, darker, crueler. The house no longer held him. It had shifted its grip, and she knew why. She had taken his place. Not in the literal sense. She hadn't become catatonic, hadn't vanished into a coma. But something fundamental in her had changed. She had made the choice the house demanded. And now, Eric had been released. But her? She could feel it already. The weight hadn't left. It had simply moved. Sat behind her eyes like a second presence. It didn't scream. It didn't haunt. It just watched. She stood up, feet unsteady on the tile floor. Her legs felt like paper. Her hands still trembled. But she was here. She was real. The journey hadn't ended with her swallowed in the house's belly. No final punishment. No sacrifice consumed. Just a trade the house had accepted. And that was what unsettled her most. Because the house wasn't destroyed. It was satisfied. She stepped closer to Eric's bed. His face was thinner than she remembered, but peaceful. His mouth twitched in sleep, like he was dreaming for the first time in decades. She reached out and brushed a hair from his forehead. "Hey," she whispered, "I'm here." He didn't move. But something in the room did. The lights flickered. Only once. Then everything returned to normal. A false alarm, or a warning. She didn't know which. The journal was gone. She checked every inch of the hospital room. The drawers, the chair, the corners. But nothing. The last thing that had tethered her to the house had disappeared. Yet the rules were burned into her memory. Every one. Especially the final. Unwritten one the house never forgets. It only waits. As she looked out the window, real sunlight this time, streaked with lazy clouds and distant noise, she thought about what came next. The world hadn't ended. She hadn't died. The trauma hadn't vanished with a neat, cinematic bow. But something in her was different now. She didn't feel lighter. She felt balanced. Like the shame had finally found a place to live where it didn't rot her from the inside. Like the memory of what she had done was no longer a blade, but a scar, and scars at least didn't bleed. From the bed, Eric stirred. Just once. A single sound left his throat. Marla, barely audible. Raw from Dessous. She turned sharply. Tears came fast. "I'm here," she said again, this time louder. His eyes didn't open. But she didn't need them to. He knew. For the first time in her life, the silence between them didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. Outside, the sky darkened slightly. A cloud passed, but in the reflection on the hospital window, just for a second, she saw it. The door, the red one, still closed, but there, waiting, and somewhere far beneath the soil and stone and memory of the world, the house sighed. Not dead, not sleeping, just watching. For 3 days, Eric didn't speak again. But he was awake, not always lucid, not always entirely present, but aware, his fingers twitching at sounds, his eyes opening briefly to light, his body flinching when voices rose too quickly near his bed. The doctors called it miraculous. They ran tests, MRI scans, blood work. None of it explained anything. His brain had shown almost no meaningful activity for years. Then suddenly, life. As though someone had flipped a switch. They used words like unprecedented and anomaly, but Marla could hear the truth in their voices. They were scared. They didn't know what had changed, and no one wanted to ask the question out loud what woke him. Marla did, every night, quietly. In the corners of her thoughts, when the room stilled and the machines clicked like distant footsteps, she asked it again and again. And each time, she felt the answer like breath on the back of her neck. You did. But the house hadn't left her. not fully. She carried it now. It lived behind her eyes and underneath her heartbeat. There were moments, small and subtle, where the veil between this world and that one fluttered. A door frame that bent slightly too far inward. A nurse's reflection that smiled longer than it should have. A wheeled cart left unattended near the elevators that rattled once, as if breathing. She kept her eyes open, but not too wide, because the house liked to be looked at, just not examined. On the fourth night, she stayed beside Eric's bed long, past the last round of visiting hours. No one questioned her. The staff had begun to avoid the room, trading silent glances as they walked by, pretending not to notice the temperature difference, or the way the lights flickered when Eric twitched in his sleep. Marla held his hand. It was warmer now, stronger, but something inside his pulse felt doubled, as if two rhythms were moving through him, his own and something else's, shadowing behind it. He spoke at 3:14 a.m., no warning, eyes still closed. "Marl," she leaned in fast. "I'm here." His lips trembled, and then the words came like ice, slow, cutting, wrong. "They're still in the walls." Marla froze. "What?" "They followed you. From the house. They wear me when I sleep." His breathing changed, hitching like he was drowning under memory. "They keep showing me the room with no door. You remember it?" Her throat closed. She did. The one she never opened. The one she passed every time in the hallway of shifting doors. The one the journal never mentioned. The one the house ignored. And that had always been the most terrifying part. Because in a place where everything was hungry to be seen, a door ignored meant something buried. She nodded. "They're building it again," he whispered. And then he slept. She stayed awake. At dawn, a faint line of dust appeared beneath the floorboards under his bed. She noticed it only because her foot stuck slightly when she moved to grab a glass of water. It wasn't there before. It hadn't been there when they wheeled him in. And yet, there it was. A crack, so small, so patient. The next night, she began to dream again. Not the full house. Not yet, just hints. A wet hallway. A ticking clock. The sound of something massive inhaling below her bed. And laughter. Her laughter. From behind a mirror. By the fifth night, her journal was back, folded neatly on the windowsill, though no one had entered the room. The leather cover was darker now, damp to the touch, and inside the rules had returned. But they were different. Shorter, sharper. Burned into the page in ash-colored ink. Rule 1: the house doesn't need walls anymore. Rule 2: if he dreams of the red door, don't let him wake. Rule 3: if you hear yourself speak when your mouth is closed, leave the room. Immediately. Marla dropped the book. Her hands were shaking too hard to hold it. Eric stirred in his sleep. His eyes opened, half-lidded, unfocused, and he smiled, nodded her. At something behind her, she turned. There was nothing, just the window. But in the glass, her reflection didn't move. It watched her, smiling, wide. From the corner of the room, the wall exhaled. A low breath. Dust curled upward from the crack in the floor. Eric muttered again, louder this time. "She's in the walls now." Marla backed away from the bed. "No," she said. "That's not possible. I destroyed the house." But even as she said it, the light above the bed turned red for exactly 3 seconds. Then back to white. The room was silent. The journal flipped itself to a blank page. And words formed slowly. Rule 4: if the house lets him go, it's only because it wants you instead. Outside, the hallway light blew out. Then another. And another, like something walking toward the door. Click. 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 Each bulb dying in its wake. The red door was coming. And it remembered her name. Marla didn't blink. Not when the last hallway light went out. Not when the creeping silence seeped beneath the hospital door like smoke from a fire she couldn't smell. She stood in the middle of Eric's room with every muscle locked, her eyes fixed on the door handle, waiting for it to turn. It didn't. Not yet. But something was pressing from the other side. She could feel it, like breath caught behind a wall too thin to hold it. Eric mumbled again. She's writing now. She's writing everything. Marla turned to him. His eyes were still closed, but his lips moved in an uneven rhythm, like he was speaking someone else's words, or worse, translating them. The journal on the windowsill fluttered violently, flipping its own pages like a bird trying to escape. Then it stopped. And on the next open page, a sentence formed in jagged, wet ink. You're inside the house again. You just haven't noticed the walls. She grabbed it, heart pounding. No, she whispered. I left. The page answered immediately. The house doesn't care where your body goes. It only cares where your guilt lives. The door handle clicked once, just once, not turning, acknowledging, then silence. Eric jerked in bed. His arms shot upward, stiff as iron bars, and his chest heaved with a sudden breath that didn't sound like air. It sounded like suction, as though something had just pulled itself out of him. And then his eyes opened, but they weren't his eyes. They were hers, her reflections, the same eyes that had stared back at her from the hospital window the night before. Wide, unblinking, full of something not quite human and far too knowing. Marla, he said. But the voice wasn't Eric's. It was too flat, too perfect. She stepped back, heart hammering. What are you? The thing in his skin smiled, slowly, like it was trying on the motion for the first time. I'm what you left behind. The version of you that never climbed the stairs. The part that stayed. The part that kept the house fed when you walked away. She shook her head. That part's gone. I made the choice. I took the weight. The lights above flickered. The journal flipped to another page on its own. Rule 5: the house doesn't deal in endings. Only circles. The door behind her opened. Not all the way, just enough. A red glow spilled in, soft, pulsing. The reflection, Merrick looked toward it, then at her. You think this was about guilt? It asked. She said nothing. It was about stories. The ones you told yourself, the ones you buried. You built an entire house out of them. And now, it's writing you. From behind the red glow, she heard something begin to scrape. A pen, on wood, writing, etching, over and over. It grew louder, more frantic, until it was almost a shriek. Eric's body convulsed once, then sat up, ramrod straight, his voice layered now, echoing slightly, her voice, the house's voice, all of them together. Room 0 is open. She'd never seen room 0, not in any hallway, not in any dream, but she had passed its absence 1,000 times. A door that wasn't there. A space that refused to be counted. And now, the red light behind the door was bleeding into the hospital floor, staining the linoleum like ink on paper. The journal in her hands began to heat. Smoke rose from the seams. She opened it, and across the last page, a single question had been carved. Not written, where does the story end if you never stop telling it? The pen, scratching behind the door, grew louder, faster, and then everything stopped. The light vanished. The door swung fully open. Beyond it, her bedroom. From childhood. Not burned. Not rotted. Perfect. Clean. Lit by sunlight through yellow curtains. She took a step forward. The room was silent. Still. Then she heard it. The scratching again. But this time, under the bed, she froze. It scratched once, twice. Then a pause. Then it began writing again. Not on paper, on the floorboards. Slow, deliberate carving. She crouched low, hesitating, heart drumming against her ribs. And there, beneath the bed, something was curled up. Not a person. Not a shadow. A shape, thin fingers, hollow eyes, and a hand that held a single red crayon. It was scratching one word again and again into the floor. Hestoi. Marla stood, her breath caught, because now behind her she could hear footsteps, bare feet, wet, dragging. She turned, and standing in the hospital hallway was a second her. No tricks, no reflections. Not a version of the past or future. Just her. And the only difference, that version was already walking into the red glow, smiling, peaceful, ready to stay. Marla lunged to stop her, but the moment her fingers touched the double's shoulder, the world fractured. Walls peeled. Light shattered. The story rewrote itself in real time. The journal burned in her hands, and a new page grew beneath the ash. Rule 6. When you meet the version of yourself who accepts the house, you either become her or destroy her. The other Marla turned and smiled. Let's end this. Marla didn't respond. Not at first. She just stared at the other her, the Doppelganger, the echo, the mirror that had stopped reflecting, and felt every cell in her body recoil. The double wasn't twisted or monstrous. That would have been easier. No jagged teeth or sunken eyes, no voice like broken glass. She looked perfect, serene, real. As though this version of her had never known rot, or loss, or the weight of watching someone drown and doing nothing but letting it happen. I don't understand, Marla whispered. But of course she did. The other Marla tilted her head, the movement gentle, almost kind. You do. You've always known. They stood in the open doorway to the bedroom she hadn't seen in decades, sunlight pooling at their feet like a false promise. It was the room she'd slept in the night before Eric died, the night before everything broke, and somehow it had been rebuilt, every detail immaculate. Her stuffed rabbit on the pillow, the chipped desk lamp, even the sticker on the window she once peeled halfway off and never finished. The realness of it made her nauseous. Why are you here? Marla asked, her voice shaking. What do you want? The other her smiled. I want what you were too afraid to want. I want the quiet. No more running. No more guilt. No more rooms with rules and rot and screaming things in the walls. Just a closed loop. A clean story. One that ends the way it's supposed to. No, Marla said quickly. That's not peace. That's surrender. Surrender can be peace. No, it's forgetting, it's erasing. The other Marla stepped aside, gesturing toward the bed. Then don't fight me. Just lie down. Let me carry the ending. Behind her, the bed looked soft, inviting. Like it had been waiting all these years with the sheets still warm. Marla felt her legs weaken, not from fear, but from the terrible, seductive pull of relief. It would be so easy, so final. One choice, one breath, and the house would seal itself. No more voices, no more scratching, no more weight. But then the journal crackled in her hand, blackened, burnt, still alive. A new message scorched itself into the last page. Rule 7. The house rewards surrender. But it only releases the ones who fight. She looked up. The other her was closer now. Too close. Their foreheads almost touched. I don't want to destroy you, Marla said. You already did, the double replied. And then she lunged. They collided like thought and memory crashing together. No fists, no screaming, just pressure. Overwhelming pressure. Like the air between them had solidified and was now trying to choose who deserved to stay. Marla was thrown back into the hallway, the journal flying from her hand and skidding beneath the bed. She scrambled to her feet just as the double stepped out of the room, but something had changed. Her eyes, they were no longer perfect. There was panic now. Cracks forming in the mask. You shouldn't have touched me, the double whispered. Now we're linked. The hallway behind her began to dissolve. Literally. Walls caving inward like paper burning from the corners. Shadows peeled off surfaces and crawled along the floor like oil. Every rule, every warning, every door she'd walked past. It was all unraveling. You started the story, the double hissed, voice warping. But you don't get to write the ending. The floor split. Marla jumped back just as her childhood desk was sucked into the void. Then something laughed, low, wet, familiar. It was the house, not the walls, not the rules. The thing that had been underneath it all. You don't understand, the other Marla gasped. It wants us to fight. That's how it feeds. Every choice is a meal. Every refusal is a prayer it answers in teeth. Marla looked around. The world was collapsing now. No ceiling, no floor. Just her, her double, and a horizon of red. I'm not feeding it anymore, she said. How will you stop it? I'm not supposed to. The other Marla paused. Then what are you supposed to do? Marla didn't answer. She ran. Straight back into the bedroom. Back into the memory. back to the bed. She dove beneath it, into the shadows, into the dark, where the crayon, scratching child had once carved Stea 1,000 times into the floor. The journal waited there, open. One more rule had formed. Rule 8: find the original room, the first choice. Burn it. The air turned to glass. She grabbed the book, and when she emerged from beneath the bed, the house was gone. Not vanished, not dead, just waiting. For what? For her to go back, to the real place it began. The quarry, the edge of the water, where a little girl once stood and smiled. The quarry was quieter than it had any right to be. Marla stood at its edge, staring down at the still, black water, the way she had 19 years ago, but this time with the weight of everything she had seen pressing against her spine. No breeze moved the trees. No birds circled above. The world had gone still in the way things do when they're about to change. The journal lay heavy in her hand, pulsing faintly like it had its own breath. Its pages were darkened, warped from heat and shadow, but it had brought her here, back to the beginning. The place where the choice had been made. The place the house had sprouted from like mold blooming across memory. She knew it now. The house hadn't been some abstract purgatory built by grief. It had been planted, with intent, with blood. And this was the soil. The water looked the same, too still, too dark. It hadn't moved in decades, not really. It didn't ripple. It didn't shift. It watched. The last time she stood here, she hadn't realized that. She'd only seen her brother fall, watched his head vanish beneath the surface, limbs flailing once before silence swallowed the sound. She'd convinced herself it was an accident, that she froze, that she wasn't old enough, strong enough, brave enough. But now she knew the truth. She stepped back. She watched him drown, and something in the water saw her smile. She closed her eyes. That moment had repeated itself 1,000 ways inside the house, with different endings, different versions of her, of Eric. But this was the first version, the root memory, the one that had never been rewritten. The journal vibrated once. She opened it. Rule 9: the house began here, so it must end here. Fire or water, you choose. She looked down at the shoreline. Something waited at the edge. A door, red, slick with condensation, as though it had risen just now from beneath the surface. No frame, no hinges, just standing there, water licking its base but never crossing its threshold. And, as she watched, the handle twitched, a warning, or an invitation. Behind her, the trees rustled for the first time. She turned. The other Marla was there, but she looked wrong now, unstable. Her eyes flickered, shifting between colors. Her skin buzzed faintly, like static threatening to burn through. The perfect calm from before was gone. She looked tired, but she was smiling, and that made it worse. You made it, the double said. Took you long enough. Marla didn't speak. The other her stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. This is where it starts. The house. The rot. The forgetting. You don't have to go in. Marla glanced at the door by the water. I'm not going in, she said. I'm burning it. The other Marla cocked her head. And if it doesn't burn, then I drown it. Silence stretched between them like a wire. The double nodded slowly. You know what happens if you destroy it. Marla didn't need to ask. The version of her that had walked through the house, who'd faced its doors, its mirrors, its rules, had made peace with the cost. If she ended the house, she ended every version of her that had ever lived inside it. And that meant one truth above all: she wouldn't survive this. She stepped toward the water. The red door pulsed, reacting to her presence. The wood wept slowly at its corners, bleeding something black. She turned to the double one last time. Are you going to try and stop me? No, the other her said. I just came to watch. And as she smiled again, her face fractured. A hairline split down her cheek, like glass under pressure. She was cracking. The house was unraveling. Marla walked into the water. Each step sucked at her feet, cold and relentless. The surface, once still, shivered at her contact. as if unsure how to touch someone who had returned with intent. She stood in front of the door. The journal flared hot in her hand. She opened it one final time. No more rules, just a blank page, waiting. She reached into her coat and pulled out the lighter, the one she'd carried for years but never used. It wasn't about fire. It was about control, about whether she could make herself act. She clicked it once, nothing. Twice, a spark. The flame caught the edge of the journal. The paper blackened, curled, and then the screaming started. Not hers. Not Eric's. The house. It howled through the trees, through the water, through the door, shaking the world around her. The red frame splintered, cracks racing across its surface like lightning. A burst of smoke spilled from the knob, and the water beneath her feet boiled. But she didn't move. She let the journal burn down to her fingertips. Let it fall into the water. Let the flame spread across the surface, licking at the edges of the door like hungry tongues. And the house began to die. The double screamed from the shore, her body splitting open, collapsing into ash and memory. Eric's voice called out, not from the house, not from the water, from the real world, from a hospital bed. Marla, she turned. The last of the door crumbled, and the water rushed inward to take it all, the memory, the rules, the guilt, everything. Marla stepped deeper and let go of the story, of the weight, of herself. The house didn't drag her down. She walked. And in the silence that followed, the quarry went still again. But this time, it didn't watch. It slept. For the first time in 19 years. There was no ceremony to it. No final scream. No flash of light signaling release. Just water, black and endless, closing over her head like a curtain being drawn. Soft, complete, absolute. Marla didn't fight it. She didn't flail. She let the cold press against her skin, fill her ears, crawl into her lungs like smoke with weight. It was terrifying, yes, but not because of pain. It was terrifying because of how familiar it felt, like slipping into a shape she'd worn her entire life. The descent didn't take long. There was no bottom, no impact. She simply stopped sinking, and then she was suspended, held, not by the water, but by something deeper. Something under the waterline of memory and beyond the reach of waking thought. A space between moments, stitched together by the choices she'd never made out loud. It was quiet here, not peaceful, dead. But not in the way death is usually imagined. This was different. Not an ending. Not even a void. It was a stillness earned only by telling the truth. The kind of silence that follows confession. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a liar. Above her, the water began to ripple. Faint vibrations moved down like echoes of footsteps from a place far removed. A pulse, distant but steady. Then a sound, muffled, out of place. A voice. Eric's. Marla, wake up. Come on. Please. It wasn't dream echo. It wasn't house voice. It was real, urgent, human, and afraid. She opened her eyes. The water was gone. The weight was gone. But she didn't float up. She rose. Like the world was reversed and gravity had remembered her name. The silence fractured with a pop, and then she was in the hospital room, gasping, choking on air like it was the wrong element. Hands on her shoulders. Eric's hands. And Eric, real, alive, blinking at her with red, rimmed eyes and a face she barely recognized because he had changed, grown, survived. His hospital gown was rumpled. His IV pulled slightly from his wrist, beeping an alarm no one was coming to check. Marla, he whispered, tears falling now. Jesus Christ. I thought. He didn't finish. He just held her, and she let him, because there was nothing left to say. The room around them was pale and solid. No flickering, no shifting walls, no hum of unseen breath hiding behind the ceiling tiles. The journal was gone. The shadows didn't twitch. The mirrors reflected only what they should. But Marla knew better. The house wasn't gone. It never would be. Because it hadn't been a place. It had been a choice. And choices don't vanish. They stay, beneath the skin, in the quiet moments. In the way you hesitate before answering a question too honestly. in the way you remember things differently depending on how badly you want to forgive yourself. That was the house's secret. It didn't haunt. It waited. Eric held her tighter. She could feel the bones in his arms. The raw tremble of someone who had walked along the edge of something unspeakable and come back. "I dreamed of you," he said softly. "But it wasn't you." "I know," she replied. "You were standing at the edge." "I always was." Silence passed between them. This time, not empty, not punishing, just quiet. The kind they'd never had as kids. Then Eric pulled back, blinking. "Where did you go, Mar?" When you disappeared for a few minutes." She didn't answer. She just looked at him. And he seemed to understand. Outside, the sun rose. Real sun, not painted, not bent by memory, just dawn. Marla watched it pour through the window. And for the first time since she could remember, she let it touch her. No recoil, no shame, just light. Behind her eyes, the house remained. Dormant, but present. Like a story no longer being told, but never truly forgotten. She would live now. She would carry it. And as long as she remembered what the walls had said, she'd never build them again. Because the truth is simple. You don't escape the house. You learn to close the door. For the first time in over a week, Marla slept. Real sleep. Not the house's false softness. Not the dream, wrapped illusions of quiet lullabies and wrong sunlight. This was the heavy, sinking kind of sleep that only comes after survival, after war. The kind where your body gives up before your mind even realizes it's safe. Eric slept too. Across the room, his chest rose and fell in a way that still made her heart clench with disbelief. He was alive, present. His breathing wasn't assisted. His dreams were his own. And for a while, there was nothing. Just peace. But the house had taught her one thing above all else: peace was conditional. It didn't last. It waited. Marla stirred around 4 a.m. She didn't wake because of sound or movement. It wasn't the machines. It wasn't Eric. It was the weight in the room. The kind that didn't touch you directly, just filled the space beside you until your instincts screamed that something was wrong. She sat up slowly. The room was dark, too dark. The clock on the wall blinked 3:14, then froze. Not 3:15, not 3:13, just stuck. The journal was gone, had been since the quarry, but the memory of its warnings felt etched behind her ribs. 3:14. The house remembers. She stood, bare feet cold against the tile. Eric didn't move. Then she saw it. The mirror. She hadn't noticed it before. Mounted across from the bed, long and vertical, like every standard hospital room had. But something about it felt off. It had no frame. Its edges shimmered slightly, and her reflection wasn't right. She stepped toward it, slowly. Her reflection followed, perfectly cinced. But then it did something she didn't. It smiled. Not wide, just enough. A small, knowing curl of the mouth that sent a ripple through her gut like ice water poured down her spine. She stepped back. The smile faded. Stepped forward, it returned. Marla turned to the door. Still closed, locked. The hallway dark. She looked back. The reflection hadn't waited. It had already turned away. Its back to her, facing Eric. "No," Marla whispered. "No." She ran to the mirror, palms slapping flat against the surface. It wasn't cold. It wasn't even glass. It was skin. Warm, breathing. And when she pressed her hand to it, her reflection didn't follow. Inside the mirror, the other Marla walked slowly toward Eric's sleeping body. It raised a hand. Not to hurt, to touch, lovingly, like a mother to a child, or a predator to its prey. Marla banged against the mirror. "Stop it!" No sound carried through. Eric stirred, mumbling. "No," she cried. "Don't touch him." "Don't." The mirrored hand brushed his forehead, and his eyes snapped open. Here in the real room, the real Eric stayed still. But in the mirror, he sat upright, smiling, empty-eyed. The other Marla turned to her, placing a finger against her lips. "Shah." Then they both vanished. The mirror went black, a flat sheet of pure darkness. Marla staggered backward. She looked at Eric, still asleep, still breathing. But for the first time since waking up, she wasn't sure it was really him. And that was the house's final cruelty. Even when you win, you never know if you did. Marla didn't sleep again that night. She sat upright in the hard, backed chair beside Eric's bed, arms wrapped tight around her knees, her eyes fixed on the mirror across the room. It had returned to normal. Clean, plain, without shimmer or warmth. Just glass now. Just reflection. But she couldn't unsee what it had shown her, what it had hinted. The version of her in the mirror wasn't just a trick. It had acted without her, touched without her, and it had left something behind. Eric stirred occasionally, whispering nonsense in his sleep. She listened closely, hoping for anything that would prove he was still him. But every time his lips moved, the sounds came out twisted, warped like a radio signal not fully tuned. Just after dawn, a nurse entered. She paused at the threshold, hesitating as though something about the room made her skin crawl. She gave Marla a brittle smile, then turned to Eric, checking his vitals. Her fingers trembled. Her smile never reached her eyes. "He's stabilizing," she said quietly. "It's remarkable." Marla nodded, saying nothing. The nurse hovered another moment, then glanced at the mirror. Her face darkened just slightly. "You should cover that." "What?" Marla asked. The nurse looked at her with eyes too tired for her age. "Mirrors in hospitals," she muttered. "They reflect more than light." Then she left. Marla stared at the door for a long time after it closed. Then, slowly, she stood. She walked to the mirror, not daring to blink. Her reflection moved in perfect sync again. No smile. No delay. Just her, as it should be. Still, she reached for the sheet from the cot by the wall, unfolded it slowly, and draped it over the glass. Immediately, the room felt lighter. Not warmer, not friendlier, but less watched. Eric exhaled in his sleep, as if relieved. But when she turned away, she noticed something she hadn't before. A crack in the floor. Small, hair, thin. Right where the shadow of the mirror had stretched during the night. She knelt beside it, ran a fingertip along the gap. It was warm. And from somewhere deep below, she thought she heard it a knock. 1, 2, then a pause. Then a third. Slow. From beneath. Her stomach twisted. She stood too quickly, dizzy for a second. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself. And that's when she felt it. Movement. Not vibration. Breathing. The wall behind the bed was inhaling softly, in and out, like it had lungs. She backed away. The journal may have burned in the water, but its rules were alive in her memory. And some things weren't warnings. Some were reminders. The house didn't need to be there to follow you. It only needed to be let in. And now it was. She glanced down again at the crack in the floor. It was wider now, and something had started to push through. Not fast, not threatening, just present. A sliver of black wood, red paint flaking. The door. It was returning. And it wasn't just coming into the room. It was unfolding from it, built inward. Marla stepped back, heart pounding. "No," she whispered. But it was too late. The walls were beginning to hum. Low at first, then louder, as though the room itself remembered. Suddenly Eric sat up, wide-eyed, mouth open in a silent scream. Marla rushed to him, grabbing his shoulders. "Eric!" "Hey, I'm here. It's me. It's okay." But his gaze was locked behind her. Terror carved across his face. She turned. The mirror. The sheet had fallen, and her reflection was still covered. There was no glass. Only a doorway now, and someone stepping through. Not a double. Not a ghost. Something older. Older than the house. Older than the memory. Older than guilt. It looked at her with a face that shifted between versions of herself. Young, old, smiling, broken, alive, dead. And then it spoke. Its voice sounded like it had been buried beneath her ribs her entire life. "You opened the house." Marla couldn't breathe. "You fed it. You walked the rooms. You closed the doors behind you. You took the weight." It stepped forward. "The story doesn't end." "I know," Marla whispered. "You are the door now." And with that, it placed a hand on her chest. She fell backward, but not onto the hospital floor, onto wood. Rotting, familiar, the hallway stretched before her again. endless doors, red light, and a single phrase burning into her mind like fire. Rule 10. If you become the house, you must choose what kind of home you'll be. The hallway greeted her like an old friend, one who had memorized every secret she had tried to forget. Marla didn't scream. She didn't panic. She simply lay there on the warped wooden floorboards, watching the familiar rot curl upward along the walls like vines that had been waiting for her return. The doors were closed, each one humming faintly, breathing in sync with her own chest. The air smelled like damp wood and distant fire. Unreal, unnatural, unmistakable. She sat up slowly. Her body felt different now. Lighter in some places, heavier in others. Her limbs responded, but not quite in the way she remembered. They obeyed like they were thinking half a beat ahead of her. As if they, too, knew the house better than she did now. She glanced behind her. The hallway had sealed. No door back, no window, no journal. Just her. And the house. It had never let her go. The thought rang through her with surprising calm. Not dread, not horror, understanding. This place, its impossible angles, its suffocating quiet. It wasn't just a reflection of trauma or memory. It had been hers from the beginning. And now it was wearing her. She had passed through the mirror. Or perhaps the mirror had passed through her. The first door on the left creaked. Only an inch. An invitation. It was painted a dull, peeling green now, the number on it no longer visible. But she knew this room. It had been room 4 once. The place where she'd hidden as a child in the earliest dream versions of the house. Before the house had fully taken shape. Back when it still needed her help to remember how to be scary. She approached the door. Her feet didn't creak against the floorboards anymore. She didn't disturb the dust. She moved like the house now, quiet, watching, waiting. Inside the room, she found herself. Not a reflection, not a trick. A girl, 10 years old, curled into the corner, sobbing quietly. Knees drawn to chest, arms wrapped tight around a stuffed rabbit. Her face was blotchy. Her breath came in ragged hiccups. Marla knew this moment, knew it better than any other. This was the day after Eric's drowning, the moment her mind fractured, the beginning. Young Marla looked up, eyes wide and red, then froze. "You're not real," she said. "No," Marla whispered. "Neither are you." The little girl stood, shaking, defiant in that stubborn, broken way only a child can be when they realize adults don't have the answers. "You didn't save him, I know. You watched. I know. You didn't cry. I'm crying now." The little girl blinked, looked down at the stuffed rabbit in her arms. The stitching along its neck had started to come loose. A thread dangled, swinging slightly. "Then why are we still here?" the girl asked. Marla didn't answer with words. She knelt down, opened her arms, and after a long, shuddering silence, the girl stepped forward. They embraced. The room sighed. The walls around them softened, the rot pulled back. And when Marla opened her eyes again, the child was gone. But the rabbit remained. She picked it up. Its eyes were buttons, unevenly stitched. Its fur was matted, but warm. Real. Something tethered to memory, but now part of her body. She tucked it beneath her arm. The door closed behind her. Automatically, she didn't flinch. The hallway was different now. Shorter, 6 doors instead of infinite ones. A mirror at the end. Cracked, but glowing. Like a wound that had learned how to shine. She began walking. Past each door, her steps echoing slightly, more pronounced now. The house no longer resisted her. It followed. She could feel it under her heels, adjusting itself with each step. She was the gravity now, the weight at the center of its orbit. At the final door, room Zo, she stopped. There was no handle. There never had been. Just a black palm print smeared across the wood. Her hand rose before she even thought to move it. Pressed to the mark. The door breathed, then opened inward. And what lay beyond was not another hallway. It was a copy of her apartment. Perfect. Down to the flickering lamp in the kitchen, and the damp spot on the ceiling that had never quite dried. But something sat in the middle of the living room floor. A single chair facing her. In it a woman, identical to her, but older, weathered, eyes sunken from sleep. The woman smiled and spoke in Marla's voice. "I've been waiting for you to be ready." "For what?" Marla asked. "To take the house." The rabbit pulsed against her arm, as if alive. And behind her, the door closed, not slammed, welcomed. Because now, the house didn't contain her. She contained it. The woman in the chair didn't move. She sat like someone who had grown roots into the floorboards, her frame slack with time, her gaze both soft and unrelenting. Marla felt herself resisting the urge to speak, to ask the question that boiled just behind her teeth, because she already knew the answer. This was her. Not a reflection, not a trick, not a manifestation of guilt or grief. This was her later, the version that stayed, the one who gave in, the one who stopped walking and let the house wrap itself around her like skin. "I thought I beat it," Marla said finally, stepping closer, though her knees fought the motion. "I burned the journal, I closed the doors, I drowned the memory." The older her smiled faintly. "You think that was the house's end? That was just you clearing the path." Marla's breath caught. "For what?" "For this," the woman said, lifting a hand slowly, gently, as if the act of movement itself could tear something in the room. "The house is a story. It always was. And stories don't die, Marla. They change owners." The words rang in her ears with the weight of prophecy. All at once, she could feel the hallway behind her again, pulsing eager. The doors, the rules, were silent now, not because they'd lost power, but because they were watching, waiting to see what she would do next, whether she would sit in the chair or walk away. "I didn't come back for this," she said, but the conviction in her voice was already starting to tremble. "You didn't come back at all," the older her replied. "The house pulled you. The moment you let the memory stay. The moment you stopped pretending it never happened. I faced it. You remembered it. That's different." Marla turned from her double and looked around the apartment. It was hers, down to every tiny imperfection. But it wasn't hers. The light was wrong, too soft, like sunset caught in molasses. The shadows didn't behave. They curved around objects instead of casting behind them. Time didn't live in this space. It folded. "How long have you been sitting here?" she asked. Her double shrugged, the movement slow. "Since the last version of me walked in and asked the same thing." Marla's stomach tightened. "This has happened before. Many times." "Then why am I the one standing?" "Because you haven't chosen yet." The rabbit in her arms twitched again. The fabric was warm, almost pulsing, like it was still stitched with something alive. She glanced down at it, remembering how tightly her child self had held it. How that small, broken girl had clung to it like a life raft while the world collapsed around her. That girl had never truly let go. "You want me to take the house?" Marla said quietly. "No," the older her replied. "It wants you to. I'm just the last page in your version of the story. What happens if I sit? You don't get up." Marla laughed bitterly. "Of course not." The woman stood slowly, and as she did, the chair vanished behind her like a puff of smoke inhaled by the walls. Now they stood face to face, inches apart. It wasn't like confronting a reflection. It was like staring into a decision. "I want to end it," Marla whispered. "You can't," the double replied. "You're not allowed to. Not anymore." "Why?" "Because endings are for readers, not for those inside the story." That broke something in her. She stepped back, clutching the rabbit tight, eyes burning. "Then what am I?" Her double looked at her with something close to pity. "You're the house now, Marla. You walk its halls, you breathe its rules. You carry every version of yourself that ever ran, hid, screamed, or watched. I don't want that. It doesn't matter." Marla looked down. The floor was shifting again. A new hallway unfurled behind her like a tongue rolling from a hungry mouth. More doors, more silence, more stories. She turned back. The older her was gone, no smoke, no sound, just gone, and in her place, a mirror, uncracked, waiting, Marla walked toward it, slowly, as if the floor might vanish beneath each step. When she reached it, she raised a trembling hand and touched the glass. It was warm. And this time, the reflection didn't smile, it cried. Silent tears rolling down her face, as though the reflection knew what she didn't. That this wasn't the end of the house. It was the beginning. Because the door she'd walked through was no longer behind her. It was inside her. She stood in front of the mirror, watching herself weep. The tears in the reflection slid down with careful, painful grace. Too slow to be human, too precise to be random. Marla didn't feel them on her own cheeks. Her skin was dry. Her chest was still. But the version of her inside the glass looked devastated, like it had just learned something too heavy to carry. It was crying for her, not with her. And that terrified her more than the house ever had. Behind her, the hallway stretched again, but differently this time. Not infinite. Not random. Every door bore her name now. Marla carved into the wood in dozens of handwriting styles, childlike scribbles, angry caps, careful cursive. Versions of her name she hadn't written since she was 5. The walls themselves pulsed faintly, and with each beat, the air grew heavier. It was like walking through the ribcage of something still breathing. She took a step back from the mirror, and as she did, the reflection's mouth began to move. No sound, just motion. But she could read the words easily. Don't forget who you were. The lights above her flickered once and steadied. Then the mirror shattered. Not violently, not loud, just crumbled, like sand falling out of a frame. She expected shards to fall to the floor, but nothing dropped. It had disintegrated into shadow, curling inward like smoke fleeing from light. The hallway behind her shifted again, and something opened. Not a door, a voice, faint, breathy, whispering her name from every corner. Marla. At first it was soft, gentle even, but then it layered, grew, a dozen voices, then hundreds, all whispering her name in different tones, pleading, warning, laughing, blaming. It filled the air like a storm pressed between walls. She ran. Her body responded too well now, as if the house had shaped itself around her stride. The hallway twisted underfoot but didn't collapse. It moved with her, the way a haunted thing does when it's curious more than angry. Every time she passed a door with her name carved into it, she heard a memory thud behind it, a sound, a sob, a scream, a prayer, her childhood echoing off wood and madness. She stopped at one that looked familiar, not for the name, but for the smell. Ash. It smelled like the burnt journal. She turned the knob and stepped inside. The room was small. Only one item inside, a television set, old, bulky. The kind with rabbit ear antennas. It was turned on, showing static. And in the static, her face. Not the real one, not the reflection, but the version of her from the quarry, moments before Eric drowned. Smiling. Still. Too still. The Marla on the screen slowly turned, looking directly into the lens, and mouthed one word. Stay. Marla's hand moved toward the power switch, but something grabbed her wrist. She screamed, yanking free, spinning. Nobody was there, but the television was off now. Dead screen, black glass, and in that glass she saw something standing behind her. A door, red, not from the house. From now. It hadn't been there when she entered the room. It was pulsing, slow and steady. A heartbeat made wood. She turned and faced it. Her name was carved across it again, but not in a way she recognized. It wasn't childish. It wasn't angry. It was scared. Every letter was etched in uneven strokes, like someone scratching it with broken fingers. She touched it, and it opened. No handle, no resistance. Just opened. And beyond it, Eric, sitting on the edge of his hospital bed, awake, looking right at her. But something was wrong. He wasn't blinking, wasn't breathing. He was frozen. A snapshot. As if reality had paused around him. She stepped through the doorway, and the moment she did, something clicked in her head, a feeling. Sharp. Heavy. Like gravity flipping sideways. This wasn't a vision, wasn't a dream. She was inside him now. Not literally, But within the moment he was seeing, he had looked at the chair earlier that morning, and in that chair, her, slumped, eyes open, unmoving, dead. Eric had seen it, and the house had offered to take it back. In exchange for what? For her. The real her. The one who had faced the rot, cracked the rules, burned the book. That version wasn't allowed to leave. The house needed her. To keep existing, to walk the halls, to remember the doors, to live inside its spine and keep the story breathing. That's why it had shown her every version of herself. That's why the rabbit had stayed warm in her arms. It wasn't comfort, it was bait. The house doesn't punish, it invites. And if you stay long enough, if you know the rules by heart, if you start hearing your name whispered by the walls themselves, you're not trapped. You've been hired. She dropped to her knees, screaming into the empty room. But the walls didn't echo this time. They listened. And somewhere deep inside her, she felt the house smile. Because it knew the truth, she hadn't come back to leave. She'd come back to take her place. Marla had no memory of standing up again. One moment she was screaming into the silent room, her voice hoarse and breaking, and the next, she was upright, dry-eyed, heart thrumming like a war drum, the rabbit still clenched under her arm. The walls were no longer breathing. They had settled. Content. Like a creature that had finally eaten after years of starvation. The house didn't press down on her anymore. It didn't twist and shift. It waited now. Patient. Fed. And somehow, that was worse. Because it meant she'd accepted something without realizing it. The chair across from her was empty again. Eric was gone. Not vanished, just not here. Not in this room. And the version of her he'd seen in the chair, that lifeless, blank-eyed shell, it hadn't been a warning. It had been a contract. The house had offered Eric a deal, take her death, and he lives. The debt had been settled. But she was the cost. Her body hadn't been buried. Her story had. Erased from that world, replaced with the silence of a room no one would ever enter again. She looked down at her hands. Still hers. But the skin felt stretched, like it wasn't meant to hold just one life anymore. From behind her came a soft creak. Not a door. The floorboards. She turned slowly. A figure stood at the end of the hallway, where there hadn't been a hallway seconds ago. It was tall, thin, clothed in something long and dark. Its face shimmered, unstable, like it was trying to choose who to be. Marla didn't move. "Do you know me yet?" the figure asked. Its voice layered with every person she had ever failed to protect. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. The figure stepped forward, and with each step, it shifted Eric, her mother, herself, the woman in the chair, her reflection, the boy in the quarry, the stranger in the door. All flickering like faces shown through a broken projector. It stopped just a few feet from her. "You've held the house long enough," it said. "Now you must decide what kind of house you'll be." Marla blinked. "I don't understand." "You will," the figure said, and handed her something. At first, it looked like nothing, just a shadow curled in its palm. But when she reached out and touched it, her fingers sank into something soft. Cloth. Old. Familiar. It was a ribbon. Green, frayed, child-sized. The one she'd worn in her hair the day Eric drowned, the day the house began. As her fingers curled around it, the figure stepped back and vanished into the wood. Not behind a door. Into the wall. Like it had always belonged there. Suddenly, the hallway was empty again. But not silent. From the door to her right came the sound of music. A single note, played slowly on a piano. Again and again. Soft. Hesitant. Like someone remembering a song they hadn't heard in decades. She followed it. The door was open a crack, and she pushed it wider without fear. Fear was for guests. She was no longer one of them. Inside, the room was all shadows and corners, except for a single spotlight illuminating an old upright piano. The keys were dusty, chipped, but someone sat at it. A boy, maybe 7 years old. He didn't turn to look at her. Just kept pressing the same key, over and over. Marla stepped into the room, her footfalls making no sound. "You remember this?" she asked. The boy nodded. "This was his song," he whispered. "The one he tried to teach me before he fell." Eric, of course. But not her brother. Her memory of him, preserved in this child's body. A version untouched by drowning, still pure, still wanting her attention. She walked closer. The boy didn't stop playing. "I wanted to go with him that day," he said. "But you told me to wait. Said you'd be right back. Said we'd find frogs later. I didn't mean to leave you." "But you did." Silence. Marla knelt beside the piano. The boy finally turned to look at her. His eyes weren't accusing, just tired. "I've played this note so long I forgot the rest of the song. Let me help you remember." She reached out, her fingers trembling, and pressed the key beside his. Then another, and another. The music bloomed. Clumsy, broken, imperfect, but real. They played together for a while, the air in the room warming, not with joy, but with truth. When the song ended, the boy was gone. The piano was gone. She stood alone in the room, holding the green ribbon in one hand, the rabbit in the other. And she knew what the house wanted now. It didn't feed on fear. It fed on memory, on choice, on stories that refused to be buried. And Marla was its perfect archivist. She stepped out into the hallway. This time, the doors opened before she could touch them. Inside each, a version of her life, each one slightly different. Each one asking the same question. "Will you walk this path again?" And she finally understood. She wasn't trapped in the house. She was the house. And now she had to decide what she would become. A prison of memory or a keeper of truth. There were no hinges on the next door she passed. No handle either. It opened anyway, like it knew she'd hesitate. The hallway had stopped whispering now. No more murmured versions of her name. No more echoes of Eric's laughter. No more flickering memories brushing against her shoulders like ghosts playing tag. Now the house simply waited. Quiet, expectant. Like it had told its story and was holding its breath to see what she'd do with it. Marla stepped through the open door and into darkness. Not the inky black of nightmares, but the kind of darkness that belongs in empty theaters, moments before the curtain lifts. There was a faint hum in the air, not threatening, almost curious. She took another step, and lights rose around her, not overhead, from below. It was a stage, wooden, warped, its edges lost to shadow, and in front of her sat rows and rows of theater seats, all facing her. Every single one was occupied, but not by strangers, by her. Hundreds of versions of herself seated in silence, all of them watching her, all dressed differently. Some in hospital gowns, some in funeral black, some in outfits she hadn't worn since college or high school or childhood. They didn't move. They didn't blink. They just stared, as if awaiting her next line in a play they already knew by heart. She looked down and saw that she was standing at a podium. A lectern, something old, worn, like a teacher's desk from a classroom that hadn't existed in decades. There was a piece of paper resting on top, blank except for one sentence, "Say what you came here to say." Marla's throat clenched. Her fingers curled around the edges of the podium. Her mind flooded with all the things she could say, the apologies, the confessions, the rage, the blame, the sorrow. But the truth swam just below all that, darker, heavier, waiting to be hauled into the light. She drew in a breath. Then she spoke. "I didn't mean to build this place." A few heads in the crowd tilted. "I was just trying to forget, to leave something behind. But I didn't know forgetting would make it stronger." Silence. She stepped back from the podium, suddenly aware that her voice had echoed, loud and clear, off the unseen walls. It didn't bounce back empty. It stuck. "I carried Eric's memory like a broken thing," she said, louder now, "not because he died, but because I didn't." One of the seated Marlins raised a hand slowly. The gesture was slow, almost hesitant. Marla pointed to her. "Go ahead." The woman stood. Her face was bruised, tear-streaked, her hands shaking. "If you didn't mean to build it," she asked softly, "why did you keep opening doors?" Marla's breath caught, because part of me wanted to remember. I just didn't want to feel it. I wanted a museum of pain, not a home made of it. The woman nodded and sat. Another stood, this one a child, no older than 8. Her voice trembled when she asked, "Are we safe now?" Marla didn't lie. "I don't know," she said, "but I'm not leaving you alone in here." That answer was enough. The lights began to dim. One by one, the other versions of her began to disappear. Not all at once. Slowly, gently, like stories finishing themselves at last, until the room was empty, and only the silence remained. Except it wasn't empty. From behind the curtain at the back of the stage, something stirred. Heavy footsteps, and then it emerged. The house. Not as walls, not as a structure, but as a figure. It had no eyes, no mouth. Its shape shifted, colors bleeding into one another like wet ink on paper. Its form held no logic, part hallway, part doorframe, part void, and in its chest, a hollow space in the exact shape of her. Marla didn't run. She walked to it. The creature tilted slightly, not threatening, just acknowledging her. And then she understood. The house had never wanted to trap her. It had wanted her to name it, to claim it, because everything that is named can finally be understood. She placed her hand over the hollow. It fit, perfectly. The figure inhaled, slow and deep, then collapsed, not violently, not with destruction. It folded like a paper crane returning to flat parchment, and where it had stood, a new hallway emerged. Different, not rotting, not endless, just unfinished, waiting. Marla stepped forward. The floor was clean wood now, fresh, the walls unpainted, bare frames showing, and at the far end, a door, not black, just white, and on it, hand carved in quiet letters, Marla's house, and below it open carefully. The story continues. She smiled just a little, not out of joy, but out of recognition, because the house hadn't been evil. It had simply been hers. And now, she was ready to start living in it. The white door stood in front of her like the quietest challenge, a blank canvas shaped like a decision. Marla paused, her hand hovering inches from the handle. The silence behind her stretched long and deep, not oppressive now, but reverent, as if the walls themselves were waiting, not to trap her, not to feed, but to listen. The house wasn't watching anymore. It was listening. That was the difference. A thing that watches wants to judge. A thing that listens wants to understand. Her fingers closed around the handle. It was warm. Not artificially. Not supernaturally. Just real. Like it had been waiting for a hand that belonged. She opened the door. And on the other side was the house. Not the impossible one that twisted in on itself. Not the one built from grief and mirrors and teeth. But the one her mind had tried to forget for years. The first one. The true version. The house where Eric died, where it all began. Same carpet, same pale green walls. Same dent in the stair rail from where she and Eric had crashed a laundry basket down one summer. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing bleeding through. Just memory, just time. Except now she wasn't a child. She was here as herself. No illusions. No rules scrawled in red. No specters waiting behind doors. Just a house that had once held her life and then become her graveyard. And in the middle of the living room, Eric, 10 years old, exactly as he had been. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, building something with blocks. He looked up as she entered, eyes bright, smile soft. "You're back." Her knees buckled, but she didn't fall. "Yes," she said. "I'm back." He patted the floor beside him. "Wanna help?" Marla moved slowly, kneeling beside him. The rabbit was still tucked under her arm, and now she set it gently beside the structure he was building. "What is it?" she asked. "A tower," Eric replied. "But I'm not sure if I want to finish it. It keeps falling over." Marla smiled, her throat tight. "Maybe it's not supposed to be tall." He shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just building it wrong." She placed a block on top of his, carefully. "There's no wrong way." Eric tilted his head, watching her. "You didn't used to believe that. I didn't used to believe a lot of things." They kept building. block after block. The air in the room was light, but dense with meaning. Every motion they made together echoed far beyond the physical. This wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. It was presence. It was acknowledgement. It was sitting in the middle of a place shaped by tragedy and deciding, finally, to live in it instead of hide from it. Eric reached for another block and paused. "I don't think I'm supposed to stay here," he said. Marla looked at him. "I know. But you can." She nodded. "I think I already have." He placed the last block, then turned to her. His form shimmered for a moment, not like a ghost fading, but like a ripple in water settling. And in that second, she saw all the other versions of him. The one who drowned, the one who survived, the one her guilt created, the one her memory erased. All of them passing through this boy like a wind through leaves. "I forgive you," he said, and then he was gone. No collapse, no vanishing light. He simply wasn't there anymore. But the tower remained, and so did the house. Marla stood, the rabbit in her arms again. She walked slowly through each room, the quiet falling behind her like a cloak. The house didn't shift. It didn't bleed. It stayed. Still, honest. Because it had found something it never had before. A keeper. A caretaker. Not a prisoner. Not a witness. Someone who had seen all of it. The rot, the false reflections, the corridors that led nowhere, and still chosen to stay. She stepped out the back door. The sun was setting, but it wasn't the endless twilight of the other world. It was a true dusk, gold and pink spilling across the sky. Trees waved gently. Birds called from far off, and in the backyard someone had hung a wind chime. Its music was soft, beautiful, new. Marla sat on the steps. She didn't need the journal anymore, didn't need the rules, didn't need the warnings, because this version of the house was hers to shape. And she'd finally learned the truth. The house hadn't been built from fear. It had been built from unspoken things. The things that fester when we refuse to feel. The things that take shape in silence. And now, with every breath she took, the house changed. Just a little. But enough. It would still remember everything. But now, it would remember with her. Not without her. Because she was no longer haunted. She was home. The wind chime played its fragile song long after the sky slipped into deeper gold, each note soft like breath. Marla sat on the back step, the wooden planks worn smooth beneath her. There was a stillness to the moment that felt nearly holy, not in a divine sense, but in the way things become sacred after enough pain has passed through them. The house didn't creak. It didn't shift. It exhaled. And Marla, for the first time in years, did too. But still, the question loomed. What now? She had stayed. Chosen, faced the dark, spoken the unspeakable, carried every past self up from the basement of memory and named each one out loud. And now the house had settled into something real, something livable. But Marla wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Grief didn't vanish. It rested. And memories, especially the ones drenched in guilt, had a way of growing quiet only to rearrange themselves in the night. She stood, brushing dust from her palms, and re-entered the house through the back door. Inside, it remained still. Each room she passed was no longer a puzzle or a trap. The angles had softened. The impossible geometry had righted itself. Her childhood bedroom was just that, a bedroom with creaky floors, old posters peeling from the walls, a bed with a sunken middle. And yet, when she touched the dresser, dust bloomed under her fingertips like a whisper. She leaned closer. There, faint but unmistakable, a voice in the dust, not words, but emotion, loneliness, safety, sadness, comfort. The things you leave behind in places that know you. This house, she realized, wasn't just remembering her. It was filled with memory. Not all of it hers. Marla moved from room to room, and the sensation grew. In the hallway, she felt panic, someone's panic, rising like steam. A sense of running, of hiding. In the kitchen, sorrow, old and resigned, hung in the air like burned coffee and morning arguments. In the basement, She stood at the top of the stairs and felt the unmistakable thrum of anger. It clenched her jaw, made her hands twitch. But it wasn't hers. These were echoes, residue, the lives of others who had stood in the rooms, fighting their own houses, their own walls, their own ghosts. The house was remembering for all of them, and now it had chosen her to hold the weight of those stories, not to suffer them, to witness them, to understand them. She descended the basement stairs for the first time without fear. Her steps didn't echo. The walls didn't lean inward. The air was cold, but not cruel. Down below, the space had changed. The chains were gone. The water stains had dried. In their place, shelves, wooden, handmade, holding objects that hadn't been there before. A child's shoe, scuffed at the toe. A broken pocket watch, frozen at 2:36. A single glove, pale yellow, too small for an adult. Marla approached the shelves slowly, her throat tightening. Each item was a memory. Not hers. Others. Those who had passed through the house before her. Some might have fled. Some stayed too long. Some, she guessed, never left. But the house had kept their moments. Not to torment. To remember. The wind chime outside rang again. She looked toward the basement window. Just enough light filtered in to paint the room in soft amber. She reached out and touched the shoe. Cold, smooth. It thrummed beneath her fingers. And then, she saw it, a flash. A boy in a rainstorm running down a street that no longer existed. Slipping. Crying. Yelling someone's name. Gone. The moment passed. Marla pulled her hand back. The house didn't push. It didn't trap. It offered. Each memory an offering. Each object, a story asking to be told. And she knew this was her task now. Not to escape. Not to destroy. To remember. To listen. To make space for the things others couldn't carry anymore. She ascended the stairs slowly, the rabbit still nestled under her arm, the ribbon looped around her wrist. The objects in the basement didn't cry out. They didn't chase. They just waited, and she would return. She had to, because the house had become something else now. Not a haunted place, a keeper. A place of stillness for the shattered. A quiet witness to the parts of people too heavy to hold. And she was its heart. As she passed the hallway mirror, her reflection met her eye. No tricks, no mimicry, just her. Tired, yes, changed beyond doubt, but standing, present. Whole in ways broken people rarely get to be. She whispered to her reflection, "I'll remember." And for the first time, the house whispered back, "Thank you." Morning in the house came like a breath held too long, finally exhaled. There was no eerie stillness, no sudden sense of being watched. Just the slow, golden spill of sunlight through the warped window panes, and the gentle creak of old wood stretching itself awake. Marla had slept, not the kind of sleep that drowned or numbed, but one that folded itself around the body with a strange kind of grace. A sleep earned. And when she woke, she didn't jolt or cry or brace for the worst. She opened her eyes and felt the house with her, not on her. She rose slowly, the familiar weight of the rabbit still in her arms, fur pressed flat from so many nights clutched to her chest. She moved through the house barefoot, and the floor, for once, didn't groan in protest. It welcomed her, like an old friend who had finally stopped asking when she was going to leave. In the kitchen, sunlight draped across the table like a memory someone wanted her to remember gently. The coffee pot sat cold and empty, the air clean. No trace of old grief in the corners. She poured water from the tap and drank deeply. It was a mundane act, almost laughably so, but it felt enormous. In this house, doing something ordinary was a kind of defiance. A declaration that she was here by choice now, not by accident or trap. Still, the silence had changed. Not heavy, not oppressive, but dense. Full, like the air had things it wanted to say, but only if she asked. She stepped into the living room and turned in place slowly, scanning the room for anything new. Nothing jumped out. Nothing shifted. But something had deepened. A sense of closeness. The walls weren't just walls anymore. They felt like pages waiting for her hands. Then she noticed it. Under the old radiator, half hidden by dust and age, a small notebook, leather-bound, its edges curled from time. Not the cursed one from before. This was different. Plain. No symbols. Just real. She picked it up and opened it. Blank. Every page. Yet it pulsed faintly in her hands, as if wanting to be filled. This was the next task. The house, it seemed, had given her a clean slate. Not to erase what had happened, but to record it. To make the house's stories more than hauntings. To give the echoes names. Faces. Meaning. As she turned the first page, a faint breeze passed through the room. Not cold, but thoughtful. And in that wind, a whisper. No words. Just a presence. One of the others. One of them. The ones who'd come before. Marla looked at the nearest wall. She placed her palm against the plaster. It was warm. She closed her eyes. And she listened. The memory arrived slowly, cautiously, like an animal unsure whether the hand offered would strike or soothe. A woman in her late 50s. Pale dress. Hair twisted into a long braid. Standing by the front door, suitcase at her feet, fingers twitching. Her mouth moved, but made no sound. Marla could feel the panic, the conflict. The way the woman wanted to leave, but something in the house held her. Something she'd left behind. Something she was afraid to face. Then the memory shimmered and was gone, but its trace remained. Marla turned to the notebook. She wrote her first words. She stood at the door with everything packed, but couldn't step outside. Not because she wasn't ready, but because she wasn't finished. The ink dried immediately. No magic, no curse. Just truth. More followed. Each page a breath, a release. Each story she wrote made the house lighter. Made her bones lighter. It wasn't an exorcism. It was a conversation. The more she wrote, the more the house offered. A boy in the attic who never cried, but hummed lullabies to a doll made of string. A mother who scratched her grief into the underside of floorboards where no one would read it. A father who built a new wall over a broken one because he couldn't bear to look at the damage. Marla didn't judge them. She wrote them, witnessed them, and in doing so, the house began to shift in ways no eye could see. Not the layout, not the color, but the feeling. It was becoming something new, not healed, not whole, but honest. And then one afternoon, the doorbell rang. She froze, because that sound hadn't existed for her in this house. She set the notebook down gently and approached the front door. The bell rang again, soft, insistent, almost timid. She opened the door, and standing there was a girl, 17 maybe, face pale, eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. She held a duffel bag in one hand, a cracked phone in the other. Her clothes were rumpled, her breathing shallow. But Marla saw it immediately. She knew. This girl was just like she had been. Lost. Tired. Carrying something the world couldn't see, but that never let her rest. They stared at each other for a moment. Then the girl spoke, voice barely audible. "I don't know where else to go." Marla nodded once, stepped aside, and said the only words that made sense. "Come in." The girl crossed the threshold, and the house didn't flinch. It welcomed her, because it had a keeper now. And keepers don't shut doors. They hold them open for the next broken soul. The girl moved like a shadow, unsure if it belonged. Her eyes darted across the room, as if expecting the walls to shift or a trapdoor to yawn open beneath her feet. Marla recognized that look. It was how she'd once walked through her own memories, ready to bolt, certain that nothing good could stay good for long. She didn't rush the girl, didn't offer empty comfort. Some silences were too thick for soft words to cut through. Instead, she closed the front door gently. The click of the latch sounding not like the end of something, but the beginning. The girl held her duffel bag against her chest like armor. Her knuckles were scraped, her lip cracked. Whatever story she carried hadn't started in this house, but the weight of it had clearly drawn her here, just like it had drawn Marla once. That realization settled in Marla's chest like gravity shifting, deep and real. "I'm Marla," she said, her voice calm even. You can sit wherever you like." The girl hesitated, then sank into the armchair near the window. The sun caught the edge of her face and lit it up, revealing something old in her expression. Not in age. This girl couldn't have been more than 17. But in burden. She looked like she hadn't rested in years. Marla sat across from her. No questions, no prying. The house would do the listening until the girl was ready to speak. Minutes passed. Then, quietly, like she was slipping a secret into the air, the girl said, "It followed me." Marla didn't blink. "What did?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But it's mine. I think I made it." Marla leaned back slightly. That old, familiar chill began to settle over the room, not malevolent, but aware. The house was listening. "I tried to leave it behind," the girl continued, her eyes fixed on the floor. "But every time I looked away, it got closer. I stopped talking about it. Stopped telling people. They thought I was just angry or messed up. Maybe I am. But it grew when I ignored it. It got louder." Marla nodded slowly. "And when it got too loud, you found this place." The girl looked up, startled. "How did you know?" "Because I did the same thing." For the first time, the girl's expression cracked. Not into a smile, but into something softer than fear, recognition. Marla stood. "You're safe here." "How can you know that?" "Because this house doesn't feed on pain," Marla said, "unless you make it your whole language. It remembers, yes. It holds. But now it listens, and it lets go if you want it to." The girl watched her carefully. "Do you ever forget?" "No," Marla said truthfully. "But I've learned how to carry it. And when it gets too heavy, the walls help me hold it." Silence returned. But it wasn't empty. It was full of agreement. The house approved. That night, Marla gave the girl the room that used to be hers. She laid fresh sheets across the bed, lit the little candle that never flickered, and placed the rabbit gently on the windowsill. She didn't ask if the girl wanted to talk more. She just said, "If anything wakes you up, it's okay. Don't ignore it. This house likes when we feel things. It doesn't like secrets." The girl gave a shaky nod. Marla left the door open behind her. That night, the house remained still. No walls twisted. No doors creaked open on their own. The air was warm. The memories settled. But just before dawn, Marla woke suddenly, not in fear, in knowing something had arrived, not at the door, not in the basement. Inside her, she sat up slowly, feeling the shape of it. Not a presence, not a ghost. A knowing. As if the house had begun threading its deeper language through her veins. The stories she'd written weren't just being stored in the notebook. They were being remembered by the walls, etched invisibly into the seams of the place. The act of writing them had shaped the house's very rhythm. It was becoming something new. A place not to trap the broken, but to hold them safely until they could carry themselves again. The house was shifting form, not physically, but in intention, and it had chosen her as its voice. Marla stepped into the hallway and looked at the girl's open bedroom door. She was asleep, breathing steadily, a faint smile on her face. No tension in her hands, no shadows on her skin. Marla turned back to her own room, but stopped at the hallway mirror. Her reflection wasn't just her anymore. It was her and the house. Not merged, not distorted, but reflected together, like a heartbeat and a body. The house was no longer a place she lived. It was part of who she was. She pressed her hand to the glass. "All right," she whispered. "I'm ready." And somewhere beneath her feet, the basement shelves stirred. New objects had appeared, new stories, new people on their way. The house had opened its doors, and the world, broken as ever, would send more souls in need of remembering. She would greet them, hold space for them. And when they were ready, she would let them leave. Because some houses don't trap. Some houses heal. And Marla's house was learning how. Days passed without marking themselves. The sun filtered through the same dusty windows, yet each dawn felt different. Calmer. The house no longer pulsed with that low, nervous thrum that once curled beneath the floorboards. It breathed now, patient and aware. Marla had started lighting candles in every room, not for rituals or safety, but simply for warmth. Not flame-forced warmth, but the kind that says someone is here. Someone sees this room. Someone knows it still matters. The girl, her name was Wren, though she said it like a question when she first offered it, had begun speaking more. She never told the full story of what chased her. She didn't need to. The house already understood. It filled in the gaps between her silences. When she walked the halls, it didn't crowd her. It waited, soft and quiet, like an animal trained not to startle a wounded thing. And she responded in kind. Sometimes she sat in the living room without saying a word, eyes scanning the spines of the books that lined the shelves, fingers tracing the grain in the floor like it might open up and whisper a secret. Marla gave her space, but not distance. She kept the notebook near the kitchen, open, waiting. Most mornings she'd write one story, just one. Any more, and the walls might start remembering faster than she could carry. She was learning that memory was not something to be conquered. It was something to live beside. But then came the day the mirror cracked. It was sudden, no tremor, no warning. Marla had just stepped out of the bathroom when she saw it. One long fracture, splitting the hallway mirror down the center. Jagged as lightning. She froze, not in fear, in recognition. The house was telling her something, not broken, just splitting, peeling open. Marla stared at her reflection. The crack ran straight between her eyes, dividing her face. But it didn't distort her. Instead, it made her seem doubled. One half familiar, one half waiting to be remembered. Then she heard it. A low hum behind the wall to her left. The space that had always felt unfinished. A place she'd passed hundreds of times without thinking. But now it called her. She followed the sound down the hall to where no door had ever existed. Now, there was one. It was narrow, aged, made of smooth, dark wood that shimmered when the light hit it just right. A doorknob so cold it burned. No markings. No whisper of what lay beyond. But the house knew she would open it. Wren stood at the other end of the hall, silent, watching. "Don't follow," Marla said gently. "Not this one." The girl nodded, as if some instinct told her that whatever waited inside this door wasn't hers to see. Marla turned the knob. It opened soundlessly. Inside, a room that breathed a different kind of air. Older, denser. This was not a memory chamber. Not a room shaped by someone else's pain. This one was hers. Every inch of it. And she had never seen it before. She stepped inside. The room closed behind her, and everything went quiet. Not still, not empty. Just quiet, like the house was holding its breath. It looked like no other part of the home. No wallpaper. No furniture. Just endless white walls that rose into a ceiling with no visible end. In the center of the floor, a single object, a large, flat box. Old. Wooden. Its surface carved with shallow grooves like topographical maps, ridges and valleys that didn't form letters, but memories. She didn't know how she knew that. She just knew. She knelt beside it, placed her hands on the lid. The box didn't lock. It didn't resist. It welcomed her, and when she lifted the lid, she saw herself, not in a mirror, not in a vision, but in fragments, a tooth, a photo, a clump of hair. The rubbery corner of a toy she couldn't name, a music box with no crank, a piece of torn fabric still smelling faintly of rain. These were not horror relics. They were truths, stored in secret. Pieces of her childhood that the house had pulled from memory and matter alike. Because this was the room that had held what she couldn't. This was where the house had kept Marla safe, even from herself. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Tears didn't fall. There was only breath, recognition. The kind that breaks and repairs in the same beat, one object at a time. She touched them, and as she did, they dissolved. Not gone, but reabsorbed. Into her. Back into the person she'd spent so many years separating from. The photo melted into light, the toy folded like paper. The fabric curled into dust and vanished, until nothing remained in the box. She stood slowly, The walls, once blank, now pulsed with faint silhouettes, shadows of herself in every age, every stage, not haunting her, witnessing her. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel divided. She felt intact. The door opened behind her. She stepped out into the hallway. Wren was waiting. Her eyes searched Marla's face, and whatever she saw there, whatever change had occurred, she understood. The girl said nothing, but she stepped closer and offered something small from her pocket, a broken key. "I think I don't need this anymore," Wren said softly. Marla took it, pressed it into her palm like a promise. "Then we'll keep it here," she replied, "in case someone else does." And the house hummed its approval, soft as dust falling onto open hands. It rained the next morning, not in sheets or storms, not the kind of rain that made the roof rattle or the windows cry. It came soft and steady, like a lullaby only the earth knew the words to. Marla stood at the kitchen sink, watching droplets thread their way down the glass. The sky outside was the color of bruised pearl, thick with a hush that matched the house's mood. Something had shifted again, not violently, gently, but no less deep. The kind of shift that meant something was about to arrive. Wren sat at the table, slowly eating toast without speaking. Her silence was no longer the silence of fear. It was thoughtful. She was watching the rain too, one hand curled around a chipped mug, the other resting on the spine of the house's notebook. It wasn't just Marla's now. They both knew that. It had grown into a living thing, passed between them, each new story adding warmth to the once cold paper. Last night, Marla had taken Wren to the basement, not as a guide, but as a companion. The girl had chosen an object herself, a small silver locket with no photograph inside. She hadn't spoken when she picked it up. She hadn't needed to. The silence around her had been loud enough. And when she placed it back on the shelf, her shoulders had dropped for the first time in days. Marla turned from the sink. "It feels different again." Wren looked up, like it's waiting. Marla nodded, but not for danger. For something else. That's when they both heard it, the smallest knock at the door. Neither of them moved right away. The house didn't tense. The lights didn't flicker. This wasn't how strangers arrived. This knock was unsure, shy, almost like it didn't want to be heard too loudly in case it wasn't welcome. Marla went to the door and opened it. No storm, no ghost, just a man, late 30s perhaps, thin, damp from the rain. His shoes were covered in mud, and his eyes had the brittle sheen of someone who hadn't slept in days, but had gotten very good at pretending he was fine. He didn't speak right away. He just held out a folded paper. Marla took it, unfolded it. Just one sentence, written in careful, shaking print. "This house was in my dream." Marla looked up and met his eyes. "It's real," she said. He exhaled. A tremor passed through him. She stepped back. "Come in." And like that, the house had a new guest. The man's name was Levi. He didn't give much else. Didn't have to. The house read people faster than they could confess. It knew when someone carried a scream too deep to reach with their own voice. It didn't judge. It simply opened. Wren made tea. Marla brought blankets. And Levi sat on the floor with his back to the wall, like someone not quite ready to take up space. He kept looking up, blinking like he expected the ceiling to collapse on him. "It doesn't do that anymore," Marla told him gently. "The ceiling? No. The hurting." He nodded, not believing her, but willing to wait and see. Later, she gave him the notebook. He opened it like it might explode. Then he started to write. His hand shook so badly the letters were nearly illegible. But he wrote anyway. Marla watched from the hallway. Wren sat nearby, not speaking, just being there. And the house listened. The lights warmed. The air grew dense, not heavy, just full. Like when a song is about to start and the silence is a kind of music. Levi didn't speak for 2 days. But he stayed. He read the entries others had made. He wandered through the house. He sat in the basement for hours without touching anything. And when he came back upstairs, His eyes were red but his shoulders straighter. On the third day, he asked if there was a room for him. Marla didn't answer. The house did. A door that had always been a closet creaked open just a little wider. Inside, a bed, a window, a desk, a place to sleep and wake and be. Levy didn't thank them. He simply stepped inside, and the door closed behind him with a softness that sounded like welcome. That night, Marla dreamt. But it wasn't like before. She wasn't walking endless corridors or chasing ghosts that wore her brother's face. She dreamt of sitting in the living room with Ren and Lavi. The firelight flickering, the notebook open in the middle of them like a shared heartbeat. Outside, people stood in the rain, hundreds of them, some with suitcases, some with nothing, all of them waiting, and the house grew, not larger, not grander, just more itself. It didn't need to reach toward the horizon, it only needed to deepen. Every room a memory, every wall a witness, every corner a place where someone could put down their pain and have it remembered kindly. When Marla woke, there were no screams, no cold spots, just birdsong, and the knowledge that more would come, not because the house was cursed, but because the world was heavy, and people were looking for places that knew how to hold the weight. Marla smiled to herself, rising from bed, the rabbit still tucked under one arm. She was ready, and so was the house. It started with the sound of gravel shifting, a crunching noise just beyond the edge of the porch that pulled Marla from her half-sleep. She hadn't even needed to sit up to know someone else had come. Another one had found their way here, following that same pull. That tug beneath the ribs, a weightless pressure guiding their steps toward the one place heavy enough to carry what they could not. She stayed in bed for a moment, listening to the soft hush of morning, to the breath of the house, steady and unshaken. When she finally rose, the hallway outside her room was already warm with low light. She moved with practiced calm. The rabbit nestled in her elbow, now more talisman than comfort, a symbol of all that had been survived. Ren stood near the front door in pajama pants and a sweatshirt, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She didn't ask what was happening. She didn't need to. Together, they opened the door. A woman stood on the porch. Late 20s, maybe. Her arms hung at her sides, not in defeat, but in pure exhaustion. Her eyes were glassy, rimmed in red. Her jaw was clenched in a way that made her whole face seem carved out of grief. She wore no coat despite the cold, and her sneakers were soaked through. Marla met her gaze and immediately felt it, the echo inside her chest. That mirror, knock the house gave when someone arrived carrying a truth too long denied. "Do you know where you are?" Marla asked gently. The woman nodded once. "I dreamed it," she whispered. "And I followed the sound when I woke up." Marla stepped aside. "You're not late," she said. "You're right on time." The woman walked in without hesitation. The house didn't groan. It didn't flicker or close ranks. It breathed deeper now, like a fire being fed, not hungry, not greedy, but grateful. Another soul meant another piece of the world's sorrow was no longer spinning alone in the dark. Her name was Jessa. She didn't give them much else. Not that day, not the next. She stayed mostly in the small back room, a nook barely big enough for a twin bed and a lamp. She barely ate, but she sat, still and upright, like someone bracing for an avalanche that never came. Ren brought her tea in the mornings. Levy passed her pages from the notebook. Marla waited, and finally one night the sound came. Not a scream, not a sob, a laugh, brief, disbelieving. And then it cracked open into tears that didn't beg for anything, just fell, pure and shattering. Marla found her in the kitchen, curled against the stove, holding a single torn piece of photograph. It was half of a child's face, no context, no date, but it was enough. Jessa didn't look up. She simply said, "He never even got to speak." I don't know what his voice sounded like. Marla knelt beside her. "You don't have to remember everything," she said softly. "That's what the house is for." Jessa held out the photo fragment like it was burning her fingers. Marla took it. That night, she walked it down to the basement and placed it beside the locket Wren had chosen. The shelf didn't shimmer. It didn't hum. But the air felt tighter, like the house had held its arms out and closed them gently around the image. Jessa slept soundly for the first time. In the days that followed, others came. Not in droves, not all at once, but steadily. A man with a wedding ring in his pocket, who wouldn't speak a word. A girl with eyes too old for her face, and a box of tapes she refused to explain. A mother who left a single shoe on the steps before entering, as if she'd decided some parts of her couldn't follow her inside. Each one was different. Each one was the same. Marla stopped asking what brought them. She knew already. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't coincidence. It was gravitational. Grief finds places strong enough to hold it. And this house, once a crooked maze of agony and illusion, had turned into something more real than anything outside its walls. It had become memory's anchor. Wren began keeping a second notebook. This one didn't hold the past. It held messages. To the ones who hadn't arrived yet. She left it on the porch in a small metal box, covered from the rain. When people arrived, they read it. Some added to it. Others cried, just knowing someone had written anything at all. You're not broken. It gets easier. Stay. One message, written in a jagged, unfamiliar hand, simply read, there's a room in this house that once held my scream. Now it holds my sleep. Livy started cooking again. Jessa began painting the hallway. Wren planted a garden in the back, even though no one knew if anything would grow. And Marla, one night, sat at the edge of her bed and whispered to the house, "Are you still listening?" The floor warmed beneath her feet. A soft breeze stirred the curtains, and from somewhere within the walls, not words but feeling answered her. Not yes, not no, just always. The house didn't heal people. It gave them permission to do it themselves, and that was enough. There came a morning when the sky looked scraped raw, streaks of copper and rust slashing through the clouds. The light bled differently through the house that day, not just from the sun, but from within the walls themselves. It wasn't bright. It was aware, the kind of light that made shadows gather close and wait their turn. Marla noticed it first in the reflection of the toaster, then in the way the dust swirled just above the floorboards, not randomly, but with a kind of rhythm, a language she was only just beginning to read. She didn't mention it at breakfast. Levi was halfway through his third mug of coffee, watching the garden Wren had coaxed to life. Jessa sat cross-legged on the floor, her sketchbook balanced on her knees, charcoal streaking her fingertips. Wren had found an old transistor radio and tuned it between stations until a faint melody emerged. Something distant and strange, like a lullaby played underwater. No one spoke of the sky. They didn't have to. They all felt it a change, not dangerous but deep. After the plates were cleared and the chairs pushed in, Marla returned to the hallway mirror, the one that had once split her reflection down the center. The crack was still there, but now it shimmered faintly, as if something waited behind it. Not hidden, but paused. She reached up and touched the glass. Her fingers didn't go through. There was no magic. But the mirror was warm, and beneath her skin, she felt something shift, not pain, not fear. Direction. She turned, walked to the end of the hall, and placed her hand on the wall opposite the staircase. The wallpaper peeled away under her touch, curling like petals in bloom. Beneath it, a series of carved lines, not etched by hand, but by time or memory. They formed no names, no words, but paths, twisting, turning, some looping back into themselves. It was a map, but not of geography, a map of experience, of grief, of every memory the house had been asked to hold. And it was growing. She called for the others. They came without hesitation. No questions. Each stood before the wall in silence, watching as the lines deepened before their eyes. Some pulses branched out, fresh and sharp. Others had faded into grooves worn smooth with years. No one needed to be told what it meant. They knew. The house was recording them. Their journeys. Their echoes. Their choices. Levi reached out and traced one of the deeper lines. "I think this one's mine," he murmured. "I felt it before I even touched it." Marla nodded. "They're not just paths. They're acknowledgments. Proof that what we felt mattered enough to leave a mark." Ren pointed to a small knot near the bottom corner. "This one hasn't been walked yet." Jessa tilted her head. "It's waiting." "For who?" Ren asked. No one answered, because the answer was already knocking. A soft, hurried rhythm on the back door. Not frantic, but not tentative either. It was hopeful. That sound, eager, searching, almost apologetic, had become as familiar as the sound of their own footsteps. Marla opened the door. A man stood there, maybe 50, maybe 60. Beard streaked with gray, a duffel slung over his shoulder. His eyes flicked past her, scanning the interior like someone returning to a childhood home he wasn't sure still existed. "I used to live here," he said, voice rough from D'Souza. 40 years ago. I didn't dream it. I remembered it." Marla didn't hesitate. "Then it's remembering you too." He stepped inside, and the air in the house stilled, not with fear, but recognition. Some stories never finish. Some threads never get cut. He moved through the halls with a reverence none of them had seen before. Not curiosity. Not awe. Memory. His hand brushed the railing of the staircase. His eyes locked onto the warped floorboard near the bookshelf, the one that always creaked louder than the rest. "I used to hide toys under here," he said to no one in particular. "Things I didn't want my brother to take." He knelt and lifted the edge of the board. And underneath, still there, dusty but whole, was a small tin soldier. No one spoke. The house was still, as if holding its breath in gratitude. Jessa wiped her cheek, charcoal smudging her jaw. Ren took the tin soldier and placed it on the mantel. Levi nodded once, like something had been settled inside him just by witnessing it. The man, whose name they soon learned was Thomas, remained for 3 days. He didn't share everything. He didn't need to. But each night he sat in front of the wall, map, fingers tracing the newest line that curved out from the edge like a growing root. On the morning he left, he hugged Marla. Not tightly, but gratefully. "Thank you for keeping it alive," he whispered. "It didn't feel like this when I left it." Marla smiled. It didn't know how to feel back then. It had to learn. We all did. He nodded, stepped onto the porch, and walked down the gravel path. The moment he disappeared around the bend, the wall map pulsed once, then stilled, and a new line began to form, one that arched up. For the first time, Marla realized something. These weren't just maps of the past. They were also directions forward. Each path carved not just to mark what had been survived, but to light the way for whoever would come next. She pressed her hand to the wall and closed her eyes. And behind her, the house sighed. Not tired, not haunted, just full of voices, of echoes, of stories that were still being written. That night, the rain didn't fall. It whispered. Not outside, but within the very bones of the house. It moved like breath between the floorboards, curling in the door frames, settling in the quiet corners that never seemed to hold light for long. Marla lay in bed, the rabbit still beside her, listening to the sounds that weren't sounds, the voices that didn't speak in words. The house wasn't just alive. It had started speaking, and it no longer used dreams. It had found her while she was awake. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the stillness that had settled like a second skin over everything. A low, almost musical tone buzzed from somewhere downstairs. Not a hum, not a mechanical whine. Something closer to a chant that barely made sense, like language being formed for the first time. She wrapped herself in a blanket and padded barefoot into the hallway. The wall map glowed faintly in the dark, lines pulsing like veins lit from within. But no one else had entered the house that day. No new pain, no new grief, no new names. So why was it moving? She descended the stairs one at a time, each step marked with that strange vibration beneath her feet. not menacing, not hostile, but full of urgency. The house was trying to tell her something it hadn't dared to before. The kitchen was empty. The windows fogged. The air warm. But the sound, it came from the basement. Of course it did. Because that's where the heart of everything lived. The shelf. The relics. The story's too heavy to carry in your chest alone. Marla took a deep breath, opened the door, and descended. The sound grew louder as she moved deeper into the dark, and with it came something else. A smell. Damp earth, burning paper, and the faintest trace of rosemary. She reached the bottom step and stopped. The shelf was gone. In its place was a door, one she had never seen before. It was made of wood so black it seemed to drink the light around it. No knob, no hinge. Just a rectangle set perfectly into the stone wall where the shelf had always stood. At its center, a small circle had been carved, just big enough for a hand. And inside that circle, the words you remember for them. But who remembers for you? Marla's heart thudded, slow and deliberate. She stared at the carving, unable to look away, because the truth landed in her gut with the weight of an old wound being reopened. She had been holding everyone's pain, writing their memories, tending their ghosts. But what of hers? Not the boy she lost, not the girl she was. Her, the woman she'd become between the echoes. She reached out, placing her hand in the carved circle. The wood was cold, then hot, then gone. The door opened without sound, revealing a narrow corridor lit only by flame, no source, no torch. Just floating fire that flickered along the ceiling like it was dripping from the walls. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her, and the voices began. They didn't scream. They didn't chant. They spoke, one after the other, low, soft, patient. Do you remember the first time you forgot your own name? Do you remember how you used to count the cracks in the ceiling to keep from crying? Do you remember pretending not to notice when the house watched you? She walked slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks, not from fear, but from recognition. These were her own thoughts, her forgotten moments, the ones she had sacrificed to become the caretaker, the listener, the safe place. She had poured herself into the cracks of others' stories so completely, she hadn't realized she was disappearing from her own. At the end of the corridor stood a mirror, but not like the one upstairs. This one didn't show her face. It showed scenes, moments, fragments of her, sleeping on the floor of a foster home, staring into a cracked window in a hospital. The first time she saw this house in a photograph. The first time she heard it call to her. The first time she ignored it. Then, more recent scenes. Ren laughing by the fire. Levy falling asleep with a half-written letter in his lap. Jessa painting her name in the corner of the wall, map when she thought no one was watching. And finally Marla herself, alone in the basement, smiling, crying, at peace. She reached out and touched the mirror, and it broke, not in shards, but in light. It burst into hundreds of glowing ribbons, each curling and dancing into the air, sliding along the walls, escaping through the cracks and stone and ceiling until they disappeared into the house itself. She didn't run. She stood in the middle of the corridor and let it happen, because she understood now. The house wasn't asking her to carry the pain alone. It never had. It had been trying, in its own strange way, to give it back, to share the burden, to let her see that even she had a place among the remembered, that even she was worth holding. When she returned to the basement, the shelf had reappeared. The objects were untouched, but a new one had been added. A broken mirror shard, wrapped in twine, tied with a single strip of paper. On it, the words "yours too." Marla picked it up and placed it on the top row. The house sighed around her, and for the first time she felt it. Not as shelter, not as weight, but as a friend, one that had finally learned how to speak in her language. There was no storm on the final morning, no banging windows or trembling pipes. The house didn't creak or moan or try to press its message into the bones of those inside. It simply was. Still, present. settled. The kind of quiet that comes only after something has been answered. Marla woke to that stillness and felt it immediately, not as dread, but as release. The house had finished what it started, and she, somehow, had too. She moved through the hallway without needing to check the wall map. She already knew. The lines had stopped growing, not because no one else would come, but because the house no longer needed to track. It had learned how to remember without holding on too tightly. The echoes would still live here. The pain would still enter, still be given space. But the weight of it didn't need to be carved into wood anymore. The people who passed through were carrying themselves differently now. Downstairs, Levi stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, humming something so soft it barely had a melody. He looked up and nodded when she passed him. Not a greeting. A thank you. He wouldn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. Wren had left a note by the door, gone to the garden. Everything bloomed overnight, and it had. Marla saw it through the window. The once shy sprouts had exploded into color, like the ground itself had found a reason to celebrate. Red, yellow, violet, bursts of joy in a place built on grief. She smiled, and her chest didn't ache when she did. Jessa sat in the hallway by the wall map, brush in hand, painting over the final space. Not erasing it, just softening it, turning harsh grooves into waves. The map wasn't disappearing. It was just changing. Becoming something less about where people had been, and more about what they could choose next. Marla stood there for a long time, and that's when the door opened. No knock, no warning. Just an open door swinging wide. Outside, the porch was empty, no figure, no suitcase, no straggler in need of healing. But she felt it, something had arrived, and when she stepped outside, she saw it wasn't a person at all. It was the wind. For the first time, the wind didn't howl. It didn't carry voices or threats or past regrets. It was clean, soft. It moved through the trees and around her shoulders like a hand brushing off dust that had clung for too long. Then the screen door creaked behind her, and Levy called out, "It's here." She turned. Back inside, the basement door had swung open again. But it didn't lead down anymore. It didn't lead anywhere she'd ever seen. It showed a field, wide, endless, lit in golden haze. No objects, no shadows, just peace. Marla stepped to the threshold, breath caught in her throat. "It's time," Wren said from behind her. "Isn't it?" Marla turned. Everyone was there now. Levy, Wren, Jessa, the others who had come after, who had found sleep or silence or a name they'd once forgotten. They stood together, not asking for explanation, not seeking closure. They understood. This wasn't about leaving the house behind. This was about letting it rest. Marla took the rabbit from under her arm. Its fabric was worn now, one ear nearly detached. But it had never looked more complete. She carried it to the living room and placed it on the center cushion of the couch. The place where every story had been told, where every silence had first begun to soften. Then she walked back to the basement door. She looked back only once, not in sadness, but in gratitude. "I'll leave it open," she said quietly. And the house, for the first time, answered in her own voice, not spoken, but felt. "Thank you." She stepped through the doorway, and the light swallowed her gently. Behind her, the walls no longer whispered, they breathed. And above the mantel, in the place where nothing had ever hung before, a single phrase appeared, scrawled in ink the color of ash and memory. "Here, you are remembered. But you are not required to stay." The wind picked up outside. Somewhere down the road, a traveler paused, felt something in their chest loosen, and walked toward the house. The door creaked open again. The house was still, but it was ready, because some places don't hold you forever. They just hold you long enough. And then they let you go.